Ethan Cole slammed his body against the burning steel door and held it shut with everything he had. On the other side, screaming. 43 people. Trapped. The fire was eating through the floor beneath them, and the smoke was already black, and the guards who were paid millions to protect these people were gone, evacuated, unreachable, useless. Just him. A janitor. A single dad who smelled like floor cleaner and hadn't slept more than 5 hours in 3 days. He felt the door handle burn through his palm. He did not let go. "Hold on!" he screamed through the steel. "Don't move, I'm getting you out." Nobody sent him here. Nobody ordered him to do this. Nobody even knew his name. That's exactly why he was the only one left who could. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this one hits you, subscribe. We're just getting started. The radio crackled at 9:47 p.m. Ethan Cole was on the 51st floor pushing a mop bucket down a hallway that smelled like carpet cleaner and expensive cologne when the first alarm went silent. Not went off, went silent. He stopped walking. In 11 years of working nights, in buildings like this one, Ethan had heard every kind of alarm, false triggers, from someone burning popcorn in the break room. Full evacuations because a sensor malfunctioned near a heating duct. The occasional real emergency that sent people scrambling for the stairwells in their dress shoes. He knew what alarms sounded like when they worked. He also knew what it meant when they didn't. The silence that fell over the 51st floor of Aurora Global Center at 9:47 p.m. on a Wednesday in January was not the silence of a building at rest. It was the silence of something that had been deliberately switched off. Ethan let go of the mop handle. He walked to the nearest wall panel, the kind most people walked past every single day without ever noticing, and pulled open the gray metal cover. Inside was a small status display, the kind of diagnostic screen that only the maintenance crew and building engineers ever bothered to read. Every indicator light was red, not orange, not amber, red, all of them, he counted. Fire suppression offline. Ventilation override active. Emergency communications disabled. Stairwell pressure system disabled. Elevator emergency brake locked. He stood there for 3 seconds reading those words. Then he pulled out his radio, the old one, the one with the scratched antenna that building management had told him 3 times to replace, and pressed the transmit button. "This is Cole Maintenance Floor 51. I need someone to confirm building status. All my panel indicators are showing critical." Static. Then a burst of voices talking over each other. "Can't reach the security desk." "Smoke on 48, somebody said." "Marcus, you there, Marcus, come in." Ethan released the transmit button and stood very still. Marcus Reed, head of executive security. Ex-military, never let anyone forget it. The kind of man who wore his earpiece like a crown and looked at the janitorial staff the way you look at a piece of furniture, necessary, invisible, utterly unremarkable. Ethan had worked in this building for 4 years. Marcus Reed had never once acknowledged his existence. Right now, that didn't matter at all. What mattered was that the smoke someone reported on 48 was not an accident. Ethan knew this building. He knew it the way a man knows his own house, not from blueprints or orientation sessions, but from years of walking every hallway at 2 in the morning, from memorizing which floor drains ran slow, which stairwell doors stuck in cold weather, which ventilation shafts fed which zones. He had spent more hours inside Aurora Global Center than most of the executives whose offices he cleaned. And he knew that a fire on 48 in the technical zone just below the executive floors, combined with disabled ventilation and locked stairwell pressure systems, meant only one thing. Someone was deliberately funneling smoke upward, toward the top floors, where the CEO was. Victoria Hale had given exactly one speech in her life that she considered truly important. Not the one at MIT when she accepted her honorary degree. Not the one at Davos, where she spoke to heads of state about digital infrastructure. Not even the one at her company's IPO, when Aurora Technologies went public, and her face appeared on the cover of 3 magazines in the same week. This speech. Tonight. This one. She stood in the green room on the 56th floor, looking at herself in the mirror, holding a USB drive between her thumb and index finger. The drive was small, about the size of a lipstick cap. Matte black. Nothing written on it. On it was 8 months of work. Wire transfer records, shell company registrations, internal communications, payroll irregularities running back 6 years. A forensic accounting report that had cost the company $400,000 to commission, and that 3 separate attorneys had told her was bulletproof. Proof that Daniel Cross, her chief operating officer, her second in command, the man who had sat across from her at the board table for 9 years, had been stealing from Aurora Technologies for half a decade. Not skimming, not padding expenses, stealing, systematically, methodically. Hundreds of millions of dollars redirected through a network of subsidiaries and holding companies that existed on paper and nowhere else. Tonight, in front of 300 investors, board members, and members of the press, Victoria was going to stand at that podium and hand every person in the room a copy of what was on that drive. She was also going to announce that the FBI had been briefed and that Daniel Cross had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation effective that morning. She had told no one except her general counsel and her personal assistant. She looked at herself in the mirror at the 57-year-old woman looking back at her in the gray blazer with the posture her mother had drilled into her and the expression that 2 decades of boardrooms had carved into her face, and she thought, 4 hours from now, this is over. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker. Not a brownout. The lights in the green room went from full brightness to absolute black in an instant, and the emergency backups, the ones that were supposed to kick on within 3 seconds, didn't come on. Victoria Hale did not scream. She was not the kind of woman who screamed. She said very quietly to her assistant Priya, "Get Marcus." Priya was already on her phone. "I'm trying. He's not answering." "Try the desk." "I am trying the desk." Silence. Then from somewhere below them, somewhere far below, deep in the bones of the building, came a sound that Victoria felt more than heard. A low, sustained vibration, like something structural had shifted. Then faintly the smell. Smoke. Marcus Reed had 12 men on duty that night. He had positioned 4 on the lobby level 2 on the parking structure, 2 covering the service entrance, and 4, his best 4, rotating between the 55th and 58th floors where the executive event was being held. He had reviewed the building's security integration that morning. He had walked every stairwell personally. He had confirmed camera coverage on all 40 access points. In 17 years of executive protection government contracts, private sector, 2 foreign heads of state, Marcus had never lost a principle. He had also never had an entire building's security grid go dark in under 90 seconds. "Blackout is building-wide," his comms man Torres was saying. "Backup generator on sublevel 2 shows active, but output it's not reaching the floors. Something's blocking the distribution." What blocks power distribution? A physical bypass. Someone had to be in the electrical room. How many people have access to that room? Torres hesitated. Building management, fire department, and maintenance. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Get me a list of everyone on night maintenance right now." "Sir." Torres's voice dropped. "Sir, I'm showing smoke on 47, 48, and 49. It's not triggering suppression because the suppression system is offline, I know." Marcus pressed 2 fingers against his earpiece. All units. Stairwells A and C begin executive extraction. Ms. Hale moves now. We do not wait." What came back was not the clean, coordinated response he expected. What came back was noise. 3 of his 4 executive floor agents reported their stairwell doors wouldn't open. Not stuck locked. Electronically sealed from somewhere else in the system. 1 agent reported his radio was cutting out. The lobby team reported the elevator banks had all stopped, every car frozen in place, some between floors. Marcus stood in the hallway outside the green room and felt for the first time in a very long time the specific cold sensation of a situation that had gotten ahead of him. Then his radio squawked. "This is coal maintenance floor 51. Do not, I repeat, Do not attempt to open the elevator doors on floors 55 through 58. The pressure differential in the shaft is wrong. If you break the seal on those cars, you'll get a flashback. Anyone inside or within 15 feet of the opening has maybe 30 seconds before. Marcus hit transmit. Who is this key? Cole. Maintenance. This is Chief of Security Reed. Stand down and get to an emergency exit. A brief pause. Sir, with respect, there are no clear emergency exits above floor 46 right now. And if your men open those elevator doors, people are going to die. I need you to hold your position for approximately 4 minutes while I access the ventilation override panel on 52. Marcus looked at Torres. Torres looked back at him. How do you know about the pressure differential? Marcus demanded. Because I've been watching the shaft pressure readings on the maintenance panel for the last 6 minutes. The fire on the technical floors is feeding the elevator shafts like a chimney. Whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing. Open those doors, and you'll pull the fire straight up. Another pause. In that pause, Marcus Reed, a man with 2 combat tours, a classified service record, and nearly 2 decades of elite security work, made the hardest call of his professional life. He took his hand off the stairwell door handle. Talk, he said. Ethan was already moving. He had the maintenance schematic for Aurora Global Center memorized not from studying it, but from years of just being in the building, learning it, the way you learn a route you walk every day. He knew that the ventilation override panel on 52 was accessible through a utility corridor that ran parallel to the main hallway behind a door marked HVAC service, no admittance. He also knew that the corridor would be filled with smoke by now, because the main ventilation intake for that zone was on 49, and 49 was burning. He pulled his work shirt up over his nose and mouth. He had a flashlight, a small tactical one he'd carried on his keychain for years, the kind his daughter Lily teased him about. Dad, why do you always have that? Because he'd told her darkness has a habit of showing up when you least expect it. He found the door, pushed it open. The smoke hit him immediately. Thick and gray, and tasting of melted wiring, and something chemical underneath something that made the back of his throat tighten. He crouched low and moved fast, one hand on the wall to keep his bearings. The utility corridor was 60 feet long. He covered it in under a minute. The override panel was where he knew it would be a gray metal cabinet, about 3 feet wide, bolted to the concrete wall. He pulled it open. Inside, a manual control interface, completely mechanical. The kind of old-school redundancy system that building engineers had stopped installing 20 years ago, but that Aurora Global Center still had because the building predated the newer construction codes. It was also, Ethan noted with something close to grim satisfaction, completely independent of the digital security grid. Whoever had hacked the building's systems hadn't touched this. He worked the controls. His hands were absolutely steady. Rewrote ventilation from technical floors to external exhaust. Depressurize elevator shafts A and B. Restore positive pressure to stairwells C and D. The panel responded with a series of mechanical clicks, relays engaging one after another, and then a distant hum, as the massive ventilation machinery somewhere in the building's core began to shift its outputs. His radio crackled. Cole. Marcus Reed's voice. What did you just do? I'm showing pressure change in stairwell C. Stairwell C and D should be accessible within 90 seconds. The smoke in the elevator shafts is being redirected. Your extraction route is stairwell C single-file executive principles first. A pause. How are you doing this from a maintenance panel? Manual override. Old system never connected to the network. Whoever took down your security grid didn't know about it. Another pause. Longer. Cole. Something had changed in Marcus Reed's voice. Not respect exactly, not yet. Something more like recalibration. The sound of a man rapidly updating his model of the situation. Is the stairwell clear? Clear enough. Get them moving. In the green room, Victoria Hale heard the words, "Get them moving," come through Priya's phone speaker. Priya had somehow gotten a live patch to the security channel and felt the first real loosening of the tightness in her chest since the lights had gone out. "Who is that?" she asked. Priya checked her screen. Says his name is Cole. He's maintenance. Victoria looked at the door. At the small curl of gray smoke visible at its base, the thin, persistent reminder of what was happening below them. Maintenance, she repeated. Ma'am. Marcus Reed appeared in the doorway, all 6 feet 2 of him, earpiece and jacket open, to show the sidearm he never used, because he had once told Victoria, "If I ever have to draw this weapon, I've already failed." He looked, Victoria noted, like a man who was working very hard to project confidence he did not currently feel. Stairwell C is opening. We need to move. What about the floors below us? 47 through 50 are being managed. Our priority is, how many people are still in the building below 55? Marcus hesitated. One beat too long. Marcus. We're still getting counts. The event staff catering the AV crew. How many people? Preliminary count suggests 40 to 50 individuals on floors, 40 through 54. Victoria Hale stood very still. She was holding the USB drive. She put it in her jacket pocket and buttoned the pocket closed. Then we're not leaving, she said. Ms. Hale. We are not leaving 40 to 50 people in a burning building so that I can get out faster. She met his eyes. That is not a discussion, Marcus. Get that maintenance man on the radio. Marcus stared at her for a moment. Then he pressed his earpiece. Cole, Ms. Hale wants to speak with you. A pause. Then, put her on. Victoria took the radio Marcus held out to her. She pressed the button. Mr. Cole, this is Victoria Hale. I understand you've been managing the ventilation situation. Yes, ma'am. What's your assessment of the building right now? A brief silence. She could hear faintly the sound of him moving footsteps on concrete, the distant moan of machinery. Honestly, always. The fire on the technical floors is contained for now, but contained doesn't mean safe. Whoever did this set it up to spread if ventilation isn't managed manually. I can keep it suppressed from here for a while, but I need someone monitoring the panel on 46 simultaneously. What else? The people below 50, they need a route. Stairwells C and D are your best options, but C feeds back toward the smoke zone below 45. D is cleaner, but the door on 40 is showing as electronically locked. Can you unlock it? Not from here, but I can tell you exactly where the manual release is. Victoria looked at Marcus. Can your men reach 40 mi? Marcus's expression said a great deal without saying anything at all. We can try. Then we try. She pressed the radio again. Mr. Cole, I'm going to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Can we get everyone out of this building? The pause that followed was not a long one, but it was real. The pause of a man running actual calculations, not offering comfort. Yes, Ethan said. But not if we treat some people as more important than others. We do this for everyone, or the strategy doesn't work. Victoria Hale looked at Marcus Reed. Marcus Reed, who had built his entire career around the singular mandate of protecting one person above all others. Who had lived by a hierarchy of human value that professional security work required of you. Marcus looked away first. Tell us what to do, Victoria said. Ethan explained it the way he had once explained things to men in the dark, in places far worse than this. Clearly. Simply. Without unnecessary words. He broke the building into zones. He assigned resources. Marcus's security team, the building's remaining working communications, Victoria's authority to reach building management and override whatever locks hadn't already been compromised. He mapped 3 parallel evacuation routes that, if managed simultaneously, could move 40-plus people off the affected floors within 30 minutes. He did not raise his voice. He did not repeat himself more than once. And in the green room on the 56th floor, and in the stairwells below, and in the maintenance corridor on 52, where smoke still stung his eyes, and the temperature was climbing. People listened. Marcus Reed's voice coming over the radio was different now. Crisper. Less of the particular authority that comes from rank, and more of the authority that comes from someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Team 2 Stairwell D Floor 40. Manual release is on the right side of the doorframe panel marked E5. Copy. Copy, Chief. Ms. Hale, I need your building manager's cell number for the external gate control. Priya has it. Torres, what are we showing on 46 panel? Torres, Cole said to watch the pressure gauge third from left if it drops below. 7. Ethan said, cutting in. Below 7, you tell me immediately. Below 7. Torres confirmed. Got it. On the 44th floor, a group of 11 catering staff, women and men, who had been sitting in a supply room with wet napkins pressed over their faces for the last 20 minutes, heard knocking on the stairwell door, and then the groan of a lock releasing. They moved. On the 47th floor, 4 members of the AV crew, who had been setting up equipment when the lights went out, found their way to stairwell C by following the voice coming through a maintenance speaker. Ethan, who had figured out that the building's PA system ran on a separate circuit and was still partially functional, talking them through the route one turn at a time. Left at the double doors. Skip the first stairwell door, it's stuck. Second door on your right. Watch the step at the landing, it's uneven. On the 53rd floor, Marcus Reed personally broke through a jammed fire door with his shoulder. 3 attempts. The third one working, and on the other side found 7 event staff who immediately burst into tears when they saw him. You're okay, he told them, in a voice that was softer than anything anyone who knew Marcus Reed would have predicted. Let's go, Dad. It was Priya who noticed first. She was monitoring the security radio. She had somewhere in the chaos become something like an unofficial communications coordinator, and she heard it in the background of one of the maintenance channel transmissions. A voice. Not Ethan's voice. Not any of the security team. A voice speaking quietly, quickly on what she first took to be a different channel, but then realized was the same channel, someone transmitting briefly and then cutting off. She listened again, played back the last 30 seconds of her recording on her phone's memo app. Package is secure. Activate sublevel on my signal. Don't let Cole, the transmission cut. Priya stared at her phone. Then she looked up at Victoria Hale. Ms. Hale, she said carefully. I think there's someone else in this building who shouldn't be. Victoria took the phone, listened. Her face did not change. Cole, she said into the radio. I need you to hear something. She played the clip. 17 floors below, in a maintenance corridor that smelled like burning plastic and was hot enough that sweat was running into his eyes. Ethan Cole listened to those 9 words. Package is secure. Activate sublevel on my signal. Don't let Cole. He understood in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Package is secure. They weren't trying to destroy evidence from the fire. They already had the evidence. The USB drive or whatever original documents Victoria had assembled. Activate sublevel. Below the parking structure, Aurora Global Center had a mechanical sublevel boiler rooms, fuel storage. The massive generator systems that were supposed to power the building in emergencies but were currently, Ethan noted, mysteriously offline. Don't let Cole. Someone in this building knew his name. Ethan pressed the transmit button. Ms. Hale, tell me something. Does anyone outside your immediate team know what you were planning to present tonight? A pause. My general counsel, my assistant, and... She stopped. And... Another pause. Longer. Daniel Cross was in the building 2 hours before the event. He requested a security review of the green room. I thought he was being thorough. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then, how much does Daniel Cross know about this building's infrastructure? Victoria's voice, when it came back, was very quiet. He oversaw the building's renovation 4 years ago. He approved every system upgrade. He has access to... She stopped again. He has access to everything. The temperature in the maintenance corridor was climbing. Somewhere below him in the sublevel of Aurora Global Center, Ethan Cole understood that the fire was not the plan. The fire was the distraction. Today, Marcus. Ethan's voice was different now. Not urgent. Urgency was a luxury, and Ethan Cole had learned a long time ago to treat panic the way you treat a lit match near a gas line. But focused, sharpened to a point. How many of your can you pull from evacuation right now without compromising the routes? 2 maybe. Why? I need 2 men on the sublevel access point. The door off the parking structure B level marked mechanical. What are we containing? Possibly nothing. Probably something that's going to make everything else look like a warm-up. A pause. Then, Cole, what's in the sublevel? Ethan was already heading for the stairwell. The building runs on a dual-fuel system, natural gas for the boilers, diesel reserve for the emergency generators. Sublevel has enough fuel storage to if someone introduced an ignition source at the right point in the distribution line. How bad? Ethan pushed through the stairwell door. Bad enough that it wouldn't matter whether we got everyone out or not. Silence on the radio. The particular silence of people absorbing information they very much do not want to be true. Then, Marcus Reed's voice, stripped of everything except the operational core of the man underneath all the credentials and the rank and the armor. What do you need? 2 men on that door. Nobody opens it without my say. And I need you to get Ms. Hale out of the building right now. I'm working on Marcus. Ethan was on the stairs now, moving down, his flashlight cutting through the dark. Not as a security protocol. Get her out, because if I'm right about the sublevel, the next 20 minutes are going to be very bad, and she needs to be somewhere that isn't here. A longer pause. She's not going to like that. I know. She's going to tell me she's not leaving until everyone else is out. I know. So what do I tell her? Ethan stopped on a landing. 48th floor. Smoke was thin here, but present a ghost of it enough to remind him of what was burning below. He thought of Lily, of the drawing she'd made him last week, and taped to the refrigerator a stick figure in a gray uniform, pushing a mop labeled Dad in her careful 10-year-old handwriting. He thought of the school play in 3 weeks that he'd promised he would not miss. He thought of the men he hadn't been able to save 10 years ago in a different burning building in a different life. He pressed the transmit button. Tell her the truth, he said. Tell her the janitor asked her to go. He came out of the stairwell on the parking level at 10:31 p.m., 44 minutes since the first alarm went silent. The parking structure was cold and dark and smelled like motor oil and the faint ghost of exhaust. His footsteps echoed on the concrete. His flashlight carved a narrow channel through the black. He found the door marked mechanical at the far end of the B level, past a row of executive parking spaces with little gold nameplates. He found executive parking V Hale. He found executive parking D Cross. Cross's space was empty. The door marked mechanical had a keypad lock. The keypad was dark, no power. But Ethan had spent 4 years in this building, and he had helped 2 engineers replace the lock housing on this door 18 months ago. And he knew that the emergency manual override was behind the housing plate on the lower left, accessible with a flathead screwdriver. He did not carry a flathead screwdriver. He used the edge of his building access card. It took him 4 minutes and bent the card in half. The lock released. He pushed the door open and stopped. The sublevel was not empty. In the beam of his flashlight, Ethan Cole saw Daniel Cross, 52 years old, silver-haired, in the kind of suit that cost more than Ethan made in 2 months, standing next to the main fuel distribution panel with a device in his hand that Ethan recognized immediately. Not because he was in the construction industry or the security industry, because he had seen one before, in circumstances he did not think about if he could help it. Daniel Cross looked up. His expression when he saw who had come through the door shifted through surprise, and then something else. Something that Ethan recognized as the specific contempt of a man who considers himself important. "You're the janitor," Cross said. "Yeah," Ethan said. He took a slow step forward, kept his flashlight on Cross's face, kept his hands visible, kept his voice completely, deliberately calm. "That thing you're holding," he said. "Let's talk about it." Cross looked down at the device. Back up. The contempt had settled into something colder. "There's nothing to talk about," Cross said. "You should leave. You have no idea what you've walked into." "I've got a pretty good idea," Ethan said. "I've also got 2 men outside that door. And I've got about 200 law enforcement personnel who are going to be very interested in this conversation." Cross smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "You're bluffing." "Maybe," Ethan said. "Maybe not." He took another step. "Here's what I know, Mr. Cross. That's an ignition trigger. The device in your hand. It's connected to something in this fuel distribution line. Probably the secondary intake valve, because that's the easiest access point, and you're a man who prefers easy access points. He watched Cross's eyes flicker just for a moment toward the secondary intake valve. There it is. Cross's jaw tightened. "You're a janitor," he said again, and this time the word came out like something dirty. Ethan looked at him. At the suit, the silver hair, the device in his hand, the 40-plus people he had tried to trap in a burning building to destroy the evidence of what he'd spent 5 years stealing. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I mop floors for a living. I do it so my daughter has dinner on the table and a dad who comes home at night." He took one more step. Now he was close enough. "What do you do it for?" Daniel Cross pressed the button. The explosion was not what Ethan expected. Or more accurately, it was exactly what he expected, which is why he had already moved. He was not a man who stood still when he knew something was coming. He was a man who for 11 years had been carrying the weight of a moment when he hadn't moved fast enough. He had spent every day since then in 100 small, unconscious ways, making sure he was never slow again. He had already identified the blast radius. He had already calculated the position of the nearest reinforced support structure. And he had already begun moving, not running, not scrambling, but moving with the deliberate, controlled speed of someone who knows exactly where they're going. The moment he saw Cross's thumb move toward the button, the ignition triggered. The secondary intake valve ruptured. But the fuel line in the sublevel of Aurora Global Center was a closed-circuit system, and the only valve that mattered. The main shutoff, the one that controlled flow from the external storage tank, was not on the distribution panel. It was on the wall behind Ethan. He had turned it off while he was talking. Cross didn't know that. The rupture produced a pressure burst, a concussive blast that threw Ethan sideways into the concrete support column he had identified 30 seconds earlier. He hit it hard, shoulder first, then the side of his head, and felt the specific bright light of impact ring through his skull. He did not go down. Cross was on the floor, knocked down by the same blast, the device gone from his hand. He was already trying to get up, reaching for something, a phone, a secondary trigger, something. And Ethan crossed the distance between them in the time it took him to draw his next breath and put his knee on Daniel Cross's back and his hand on Daniel Cross's wrist. Cross stopped moving. "Stay down," Ethan said. His voice was even. His hands were steady. Cross stayed down. On the radio, which had somehow survived the blast, Ethan heard Marcus Reed's voice tight with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. "Cole, talk to me. What just happened?" Ethan pressed the button with his free hand. "Sublevel is secure," he said. "Main fuel shutoff is closed. You're going to need law enforcement and a hazmat team at the B-level mechanical access. And," he paused, "tell Ms. Hale the building is not going to fall down tonight." A pause. Then Marcus Reed said, in a voice that contained for the first time something that sounded like awe, "Copy that." Ethan Cole sat on the concrete floor of the sublevel of Aurora Global Center and held Daniel Cross's wrists behind his back and waited for the sirens he could already hear very faintly through the thick walls of the building. His shoulder hurt. His head hurt. The smoke from the floors above him had drifted down enough to make his eyes water. He thought about Lily. He thought about her drawing on the refrigerator. He thought about the school play in 3 weeks. He thought about the men he couldn't save a long time ago. About the years he had spent telling himself that the best thing he could do for the world was stay small. Stay invisible. Push his mop cart down corridors full of people who didn't know his name and do his job and go home. He thought about what staying small had cost him, and what it had given him. The ability to know a building from the inside out. The ability to read pressure gauges and understand ventilation systems and see in a darkness full of panic and noise exactly what needed to be done. Nobody ever looks at the janitor, he thought. That had always seemed like a loss to him. Tonight, for the first time, he understood it differently. The sirens were getting louder. He waited. The sirens were still a long way off when Ethan hauled Daniel Cross to his feet and zip-tied his wrists with the cable tie he kept on his maintenance belt. The same belt that held his flashlight, his access card, and the small laminated photo of Lily that he had carried every single shift for 4 years. Cross said nothing. He had stopped struggling the moment Ethan's knee came off his back, and now he stood in the dim sublevel with the particular stillness of a man recalculating. Not broken, not scared. Recalculating. Ethan had seen that look before on men who were used to finding exits where other people only saw walls. He tightened the cable tie one more notch and pushed Cross toward the door. "Walk," Ethan said. "You have no idea what you're involved in," Cross said. "Walk." Cross walked. Marcus Reed was waiting on the other side of the mechanical door with two of his security agents, and when he saw Ethan emerge from the sublevel with Daniel Cross, zip-tied and expressionless ahead of him, something moved across Marcus's face that was not quite surprise and not quite relief, but something in the space between them that had no clean name. "Is it contained?" Marcus said. "Main shutoff is closed. The rupture in the secondary line is going to need a hazmat team, but it's not going anywhere." Ethan handed Cross off to the two agents without ceremony. "Keep his hands where you can see them and don't let him near a phone." Marcus nodded at his men. They took Cross. Marcus looked at Ethan at the burn on his palm at the cut above his ear from the concrete column at the gray maintenance uniform that was streaked with soot and sweat, and the particular grime of a man who had spent the last hour in places most people never go. "You're bleeding," Marcus said. "I know." "Your hand." "I know." Ethan was already moving toward the stairwell. "Where are we on evacuation?" Marcus fell into step beside him, and something about that. The head of executive security falling into step beside the night janitor, matching his pace, treating him as the operational lead, would have seemed impossible 45 minutes ago. Now it seemed like the only thing that made sense. 41 confirmed out, Marcus said, checking his radio. "Torres is running the last count on stairwell D. We've got 3 people unaccounted for 2 event staff, and one of my guys, Agent Reyes, who was on 47 when the grid went dark." 47. Ethan pushed through the stairwell door. The smoke on the parking level was thin, but present a reminder that the fire above them was still burning, still contained by the ventilation reroute he'd managed from the panel on 52, but contained was not extinguished. Reyes had a radio. His unit's been offline since 2200, which means either his radio's damaged or he can't transmit. Ethan was already climbing. "Not the same as not being able to receive. Can you broadcast on his channel?" Marcus keyed his radio. "Torres, broadcast on Reyes's unit channel 7. Tell him stairwell D floor 47 manual release on the doorframe panel marked E4. Torres's voice came back. "Copy, broadcasting now." They climbed. Ethan's shoulder was sending a steady complaint up through his neck every time he gripped the railing. The specific deep ache of impact trauma, and he acknowledged it, the way he acknowledged most pain noted, filed moved past. There was a time for pain, and it was later. 10:38 p.m. 51 minutes since the grid went dark. On the 43rd floor, they passed a group of 4 catering staff being led down by one of Marcus's agents, a young woman named Chen, who had a cut on her forehead and was holding someone's hand and talking them through each step with the kind of calm steadiness that Ethan recognized as the real version of professionalism, the kind that doesn't come from training manuals. On the 45th floor, the smoke thickened. Not dramatically, not the choking black of the technical floors below, but enough that Ethan pulled his shirt back up over his nose and heard Marcus do the same beside him. The fire on 48 was still burning. The ventilation reroute was suppressing its spread, but the smoke had to go somewhere, and some of it was going up. Coal. Marcus said the name the way a man says it when he has questions he doesn't know how to ask. "How long ago did you figure out this wasn't an accident?" "About 6 minutes after the grid went dark." "How?" "The sequence." Ethan kept climbing. "Security grid, then backup power, then fire. That order doesn't happen accidentally. Accidents are messy. This was clean. 3 systems disabled in the right order to maximize impact and minimize response time. Someone planned it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I reviewed this building's security integration this morning." "I know. I didn't see any of this coming." "You were looking at the security systems," Ethan said. "I was looking at the building." They hit 47. The door was already open. Agent Reyes was on the other side of it, a compact, dark-haired man in his 30s, with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, who had apparently spent the last 50 minutes doing exactly what Ethan would have done in his position. He had gathered the two unaccounted-for event staff, moved them to the lowest smoke position on the floor, and was sitting with them against the wall with his jacket folded under the head of one of them. A young man who had passed out. Reyes explained quickly, from smoke inhalation, not serious, but he'd needed to stay horizontal. "Good call," Ethan said, crouching next to the young man. He checked pulse, strong checked eyes reactive. "He's okay. We need to move him." "I can carry him," Reyes said without hesitation. "You've been breathing this air for 50 minutes. "I can carry him," Reyes said again, and the tone of it closed the conversation. Marcus put his hand on Reyes's shoulder for exactly 1 second. That was all. Reyes nodded. They got the young man up, Reyes taking most of the weight, and they moved. It took them 11 minutes to get from 47 to the parking level exit. 11 minutes of stairs and smoke, and the young man beginning to come around somewhere around floor 42, and being confused and frightened until the event staff woman, whose name Ethan would learn later was Donna, and who had worked catering events for 23 years, took his hand and said, "Honey, we are going to be just fine. Just keep walking," in a voice so matter-of-fact and warm that the young man stopped being confused and just walked. They came out into the January night at 10:51 p.m. The cold hit Ethan like a door. After the heat of the maintenance corridors and the stairwells and the sublevel, the air outside Aurora Global Center was so sharp and clean that he stopped walking for a full 3 seconds just to breathe it. The street was chaos. Fire trucks, 3 of them positioned on the north side. 2 ambulances. Police cruisers blocking the intersection. A crowd held back by barriers, bystanders. Some of them clearly guests who had evacuated from the lower event floors early in the crisis, standing in their formal wear in the snow, looking up at the building. And there, 20 feet from the main entrance, wrapped in a silver emergency blanket, and talking to a paramedic but watching the door, Victoria Hale. She saw Ethan the moment he came out. She crossed the distance between them at a pace that was almost undignified for a woman of her bearing, and she stopped in front of him and looked at him. At the burn, the cut, the soot, the ruined uniform, and she said, "Everyone." "Everyone," Ethan said. Victoria Hale closed her eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to let something go. Then she opened them and said, "Daniel Cross. In custody. Parking level 2 of Marcus's men. The FBI is going to want to talk to him before the police do, given what he had in that sublevel." "I'll make the call." She paused. "The drive is intact." She touched her jacket pocket. "Everything we need to bury him is still here." "Good." A paramedic appeared at Ethan's elbow, young, efficient, already reaching for his burned hand. Ethan let her take it. He was very tired. The kind of tired that lives in the bones, that comes not from physical effort alone, but from the sustained weight of decision-making in the dark, every choice carrying people's lives on its back. "Sir, I need you to sit down," the paramedic said. "In a minute." "Sir." "1 minute," Ethan said, and she heard something in his voice that made her wait. He turned back to the building, counted the people he could see, did the math against what he knew. 41 confirmed plus Reyes, and the 2 from 47-44. Plus the executive group from 56, Victoria, Priya, Marcus, 4 security agents, 50. Plus Chen's group from 43, 4 more. 54. He pulled out his radio. "Torres, final count." Torres's voice ragged with relief. 57 confirmed out, nobody unaccounted for. Ethan pressed his eyes closed for just a moment. 57. Every one of them. He sat down on the curb and let the paramedic take his hand. It was not over, he knew that. The fire was still burning on the technical floors. The investigation was just beginning. There were statements to give and questions to answer, and a burned hand that was going to hurt considerably more once the adrenaline finished leaving his system. There was a sub-level full of evidence, and a man in cable ties, and $400 million of stolen money, and the FBI, and the lawyers, and everything that came after the night itself. But right now, on the curb, outside Aurora Global Center, in the January cold, with 57 people breathing the same air he was breathing. Ethan Cole let himself feel for exactly the length of one long exhale, the specific piece of a man who got there in time. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Lily calling. He almost smiled. She was supposed to be asleep. She was always supposed to be asleep when he worked nights staying at his sister's place 3 blocks from the school, and she almost never called because she understood in the solemn and slightly heartbreaking way of children who have grown up understanding that a parent's work matters that he couldn't always pick up. He picked up. "Hey, Bug." Lily's voice was small and sleep-thick and immediately precisely itself. "Dad, I had a bad dream." "Yeah." "You were there was a fire, and you were—" She stopped. He could hear her breathing. "Are you okay?" Ethan looked up at Aurora Global Center. At the smoke still visible on the technical floors, the fire trucks, the ambulances, the crowd. At Marcus Reed across the street, talking to 2 federal agents who had arrived in an unmarked sedan with the particular urgency of people who had been briefed on the way over. At Victoria Hale standing straight-backed in her silver emergency blanket, making a phone call that was going to end Daniel Cross's life as he knew it. "I'm okay," he told Lily. "I'm completely okay. Promise. Promise." He watched a snowflake land on his burned palm. "Go back to sleep. I'll be there in the morning." "Okay." A pause. "Dad." "Yeah. I love you." "I love you too, Bug." He waited until he heard her settle back into the pillow. He could always hear it, that small sound. And then he ended the call and sat on the curb in the snow and let the paramedic wrap his hand and did not say anything to anyone for a little while. It was Marcus Reed who sat down next to him. Not one of the paramedics. Not a police officer with a notepad. Marcus Reed, who set himself down on the curb beside Ethan with the careful deliberateness of a very large man sitting somewhere he hadn't planned to sit and who said nothing for a long moment. Then, 11 years. Ethan looked at him. "You've been in this building for 4 years, Marcus said. "I've been the head of executive security for 3. I've walked every floor of this building more times than I can count." He paused. "I didn't know about the manual ventilation override on 52. Most people don't. I should have." "You knew the security systems," Ethan said. "That was your job. And you knew the building. That was mine." Marcus was quiet. Around them, the controlled chaos of the emergency response continued, radios and voices, and the deep mechanical sound of the fire trucks running their equipment. Somewhere behind them, one of the ambulances pulled away with its lights on. Not its sirens a good sign. Someone being taken for precautionary treatment rather than emergency intervention. "Where did you learn it?" Marcus said. "The tactics, the way you ran that evacuation, the way you knew about the fuel system. That wasn't maintenance training." Ethan looked at his wrapped hand. "Phoenix Rescue Unit. I ran a tactical team for 8 years." Marcus turned to look at him fully for the first time. "Phoenix." He said the name like he recognized it. That unit operated in the Gulf. And domestically. Industrial disasters, hostage situations. "Yeah. What happened?" The question landed between them. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Across the street, a news van was pulling up late to the scene camera, already out a reporter in a coat that was not warm enough climbing out of the passenger side with the slightly dazed look of someone who had been monitoring a police scanner and was now confronting the reality that the story was bigger than they'd expected. "We lost people," Ethan said. "Mission went wrong. 3 men who were my responsibility went into a building I told them was clear." He stopped. "It wasn't clear." Marcus didn't say anything. "I spent about a year after that deciding whether I was going to be functional or not," Ethan said. "Then Lily's mother died, and that decided it for me. You don't get the luxury of not being functional when there's a 10-year-old who needs dinner. So you became a janitor." "So I became a janitor." Ethan paused. "It was a good job. Good hours for a single parent. Good benefits. And I was good at it." He looked at Marcus. "I'm still good at it." Marcus nodded slowly. "I owe you an apology." Ethan shook his head. "You don't." "I walked past you every day for 3 years, Marcus said, and there was something raw in the way he said it, not performance. Just the plain discomfort of a man facing something about himself he hadn't known was there. Every single day. I never learned your name." Ethan said nothing. I'm not saying it to make myself feel better," Marcus continued. "I'm saying it because you walked into a burning building to save people who didn't know your name either. And I need to understand how a man does that." Ethan thought about it. He thought about the long nights pushing the mop cart, the way a building feels at 2 in the morning when everyone else has gone home and you're the only one left moving through it. The way you learn a place when you're the person responsible for its smallest, most unglamorous maintenance. The way invisibility, which had always felt to him like a loss, had tonight turned out to be a kind of knowledge. "My daughter drew me a picture last week," he said. "Stick figure in a gray uniform pushing a mop," said Dad underneath it. He paused. She wasn't embarrassed by it. She was proud of it. 7 years old. 10, Marcus said. Ethan blinked. "You said she was 10, Marcus said. "Earlier, on the radio." Ethan looked at him. Something shifted. "You were listening that closely." "I was listening to everything," Marcus said quietly. Ethan nodded. 10 years old. She drew her dad as a janitor, and she put it on the refrigerator like it was a trophy. He looked at the building. "When I stopped running rescue operations, I thought I was choosing a smaller life. I thought I was becoming less." He paused. "Tonight was the first time I understood that I'd just been becoming something different. The federal agents were moving toward them now. One of them, a woman in her 40s with the specific bearing of someone who had been in serious rooms for a long time, had a badge visible on her belt, and the look of someone with a great many questions, and the patience to ask all of them. Ethan stood up from the curb. His shoulder protested. His hand throbbed under the wrapping. His head, where it had met the concrete column in the sublevel, was beginning to make its complaints known in the persistent way of head injuries that have been politely ignored for too long. Marcus stood up beside him. "Cole," Marcus said. Ethan looked at him. Marcus put out his hand. It was such a simple thing. Such a basic human thing. A hand extended in the January cold outside a building that was still smoking on its technical floors while the fire crews worked. Ethan looked at it for a moment. Then he took it. Marcus Reed shook his hand firmly without flourish and said in the voice of a man who meant it completely, "Thank you." Ethan nodded. "Get some sleep," he said. "This gets complicated tomorrow." Marcus almost smiled. "Already is." The federal agent reached them. She looked at Ethan, at the uniform, the wrapped hand, the cut on his head, and then at Marcus, and then back at Ethan, and she said, "Which one of you is Cole?" "Me," Ethan said. She nodded. "Agent Diane Walsh, FBI Financial Crimes and Special Operations Joint Task Force. We've been building a case on Daniel Cross for 14 months. She paused. "We understand you have him in custody." "My men do," Marcus said. "Parking level B." "Good." Walsh turned back to Ethan. "Mr. Cole, I'm going to need a full account of everything that happened in that sublevel tonight. Every detail. The device, the fuel line, the conversation, everything." She paused again. "I'm also going to need to understand how a building maintenance employee knew to shut off the main fuel valve before the ignition trigger was activated." "He's not just a maintenance employee," Marcus said. Walsh looked at him. "He's the reason everyone in this building is still alive," Marcus said. Walsh studied Ethan for a long moment. Then she said, "I see." She reached into her jacket and produced a card. "Mr. Cole, when you're done with the paramedics, I'll need an hour of your time." Ethan took the card. "You'll get it." She nodded and walked toward the parking entrance with the compact efficiency of someone who had been waiting a very long time to get into that sublevel. Ethan watched her go. Then from behind him, "Mr. Cole," he turned. Victoria Hale had finished her call. She was standing 6 feet away, the silver emergency blanket still around her shoulders, the USB drive presumably still in her buttoned jacket pocket, and she was looking at him with an expression that Ethan could not immediately categorize. It was not the look of a CEO evaluating an employee. It was not the look of a survivor cataloging her rescuer. It was something more direct than either of those things, something that had burned off the professional varnish in the heat of the last hour. "I made some calls," she said. "Ma'am, Victoria," she said. "My name is Victoria." She said it simply without self-consciousness, as if it were the most natural correction in the world. I've spent the last 30 years asking people to call me Ms. Hale, and tonight seems like the wrong night to continue doing that. Ethan nodded. Victoria. I made some calls, she said again. To the building's ownership group, and to my legal team. She paused. Daniel Cross was the one who handled the renovation of this building 4 years ago. He had access to every system, every schematic, every override protocol. She paused again. He also approved the staffing contracts for night maintenance. Something cold moved through Ethan that had nothing to do with the January air. He knew I was here, Ethan said. It wasn't a question. The transmission Priya recorded, Victoria said. Don't let Cole. He knew your name. He knew you were working tonight. And he knew... She stopped. He knew you were the one person in this building who might recognize what he was doing. Ethan stood very still. He built the plan around the assumption that everyone above a certain pay grade would respond to the crisis in a predictable way. Victoria continued. Security protocols, evacuation hierarchy, chain of command. He knew Marcus's playbook. He knew mine. He had spent 3 years watching both of us operate. She looked at Ethan. He didn't know yours. Because he never looked, Ethan said. Because he never looked, she agreed. The snow was picking up. Fine and steady, the kind of January snow that didn't announce itself, just accumulated. It settled on Victoria Hale's silver blanket, and on Marcus Reed's dark jacket, and on the soot-stained shoulders of Ethan Cole's maintenance uniform equally without distinction. Priya ran your employment file, Victoria said. Phoenix Rescue Unit, 8 years. Team Commander. She paused. 2 citations for valor that aren't public record. 3 hostage situations. 1 collapsed structure in New Orleans after the storm. 1. You don't need to read my file to me, Ethan said quietly. No, she said. I don't. She looked at him. But I needed you to know that I read it. That I know who you are. Not who you've been working as who you are. She paused. And I needed to tell you that I am sorry. Ethan frowned slightly. For what? For the 4 years you spent in this building, she said, where I walked past you in that hallway and did not know your name. He looked at her. She was not performing contrition. This was not the carefully managed apology of a CEO managing a liability situation. She was a woman standing in the snow outside a building that had nearly become a mass casualty event, talking to a man who had prevented it, and the thing on her face was simply true. You didn't know me, he said. That's not the same as not valuing me. Isn't it? He thought about it honestly. I don't know, he said. Maybe sometimes. Victoria nodded as if that were the right answer, which perhaps it was. From the parking level entrance, Agent Walsh's voice carried, Mr. Cross, you have the right to remain silent. The rest was absorbed by the wind and the noise of the street, but the beginning of it was enough. It was enough to know that Daniel Cross, in his expensive suit, with his silver hair and his $400 million in offshore accounts, and his careful plan that had accounted for every variable, except one, was now being walked through a parking garage by federal agents, while the building he had tried to destroy was still standing, and everyone inside it was still breathing. Ethan turned back to Victoria. You should get looked at, he said, by the paramedics. I'm fine. Victoria. She almost smiled at the sound of her own name said back to her simply by a man who had earned the right to say it. I'll go in a moment. She paused. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. When you went back into that sub-level, when you knew what was down there, what Cross was planning, what were you thinking? Ethan considered the question. He had been asked versions of it before in different circumstances after different events. People always wanted to know what the inside of that decision looked like, as if it were a complex thing, as if there were a calculation. I was thinking about a door, he said, about whether I was going to be on the right side of it this time. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You lost someone, she said. Before, or not just colleagues, someone specific. 3 someones, Ethan said. I was the one who said the building was clear. And it wasn't. It wasn't. The snow fell between them. Somewhere behind Ethan, a radio crackled with a final count update. Torres's voice confirming that the last of the fire department's sweep had come back clean, all floors accounted for, all personnel out. Tonight, Victoria said carefully. You ran the same decision. You went into the building. You told people it was manageable. You staked everyone's lives on your read of the situation. Yeah. And you were right. Yeah. What's the difference? She asked. Between then and now. What was different tonight? Ethan thought about it for a long time. Long enough that the silence between them became comfortable rather than empty. The silence of two people who had been through something and were sitting with the weight of it. 10 years of mopping floors, he said finally. 10 years of walking through a building at 2 in the morning when nobody else was there. Learning every pipe and every panel and every stuck door. He paused. And 10 years of knowing what it costs when you get it wrong. Carrying that. He looked at his wrapped hand. When you carry something long enough, it stops being a burden and starts being a part of how you see. Victoria was quiet. I was right tonight, he said. I wasn't right that other time. Both times I went in because I had to. Both times I was the same man. He looked at her. The difference is, I knew this building. And the people in it, she said. He looked at her. You knew this building, she said, and you knew the people in it. The way they'd respond, the way they'd panic, the way they'd follow if someone led them clearly. She paused. Marcus didn't know how to lead 57 people out of a burning building tonight. He knew how to protect one. He learned fast, Ethan said. He did, Victoria agreed. Because you taught him. She wrapped the silver blanket tighter around herself. I want to talk to you about something. Not tonight, you need a hospital and sleep and your daughter. But soon. Okay. I have some ideas, she said. About what this company does next. About what tonight means for how we build things and staff things and think about who we trust with what. She paused. I'd like your input. Ethan looked at her carefully. I'm a janitor, Victoria. Tonight you were the most important person in this building, she said. And I think that's worth a conversation. He nodded slowly. We can have a conversation. Good. She finally turned toward the paramedics, then stopped. Mr. Cole. She looked back. Ethan. And the way she said his name, just his name, plain and direct, the way you say the name of someone you've decided to know, landed on him like something settling into its right place. Whatever you were before tonight, whatever you've been carrying, I want you to know that tonight. She stopped. Chose her words carefully, the way a woman who had spent 30 years choosing words in boardrooms knew how to do. Tonight you were exactly who you were supposed to be. Ethan Cole stood in the January snow outside Aurora Global Center and watched Victoria Hale walk toward the paramedics and thought about Lily's drawing on the refrigerator and the school play in 3 weeks and the burned palm that was going to make maneuvering the mop cart interesting for the next couple of weeks, and the 3 men he had not been able to reach in time 10 years ago, in a different building, in a different life. I thought about all of it at once, the way you can only do in the moments after something big, when the adrenaline has let go, and the cold has settled in, and the people around you are safe, and the crisis has passed into the past tense, and all the things you normally hold separately are just sitting there together, looking at each other. He thought I was the right man in the right place, not because someone had put him there, not because he had planned it or sought it or known it was coming, but because 4 years of nights in this building, and 8 years before that, of learning how structures fail, and people panic, and fires move, and 10 years of carrying what he'd lost. All of it had made him exactly and precisely the man that tonight had needed. He had not saved everyone despite being a janitor. He had saved everyone because of everything he had ever been. The federal agent's voice drifted from the parking entrance patient and professional reading, Daniel Cross his rights in full. The fire crews were beginning their controlled suppression work on the technical floors. The snow was steady now, covering the street in the clean, indifferent way of snow that doesn't know or care what has happened beneath it. Marcus Reed appeared beside Ethan again. My guys are asking about you, he said. Ethan looked at him. They want to know your name, Marcus said. Something moved through Ethan's chest. small and quiet and completely real. "They can just ask me," he said. "They're a little intimidated," Marcus said, and the corner of his mouth moved in a way that might in better lighting have been a smile. Ethan looked at the cluster of security agents across the street. Young men and women in tactical gear who had spent the last hour running stairwells in a burning building, following instructions from a voice on a radio, doing things they'd been told by a person whose face they hadn't seen. He looked at them, and they were already looking back. He raised a hand. Just a hand. Simple. Several of them raised hands back. And Ethan Cole, whose name the whole building hadn't known 2 hours ago, stood in the snow and felt the particular weight of being seen, not celebrated, not elevated, just seen, and thought that it was all things considered enough. More than enough. The paramedic appeared at his elbow again. "Sir, hospital, now." This time Ethan went. The hospital kept Ethan for 6 hours, not because they wanted to. He made that difficult, but because the burn on his palm was second degree across 2 inches of skin. The concussion from the concrete column needed monitoring, and the smoke inhalation had left his oxygen saturation low enough that the attending physician, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Reyes, who shared a last name with the security agent, and absolutely nothing else about him, told Ethan flatly that he could either stay voluntarily, or she would have him admitted involuntarily, and which did he prefer? Ethan stayed voluntarily. He sat in the hospital bed at 11:47 at night with his hand wrapped and an oxygen monitor clipped to his finger and his phone on the tray beside him, and he stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of the hospital moving around him. Wheels on linoleum, voices at the nurses' station, the distant rhythm of equipment doing its quiet work, and he thought about Daniel Cross. Not about what Cross had done. He understood what Cross had done. He understood it the way you understand a blueprint. The logic of it was clear. The execution was almost elegant in its coldness. What he kept coming back to was the moment in the sublevel when Cross had looked at him and said, "You're the janitor." Like those 3 words explained everything, like they were a category that meant harmless, ignorable beneath consideration. He kept coming back to that because he wanted to understand it. Not to be angry about it, to understand it. Because a man like Cross, smart, methodical, someone who had spent 9 years sitting across from Victoria Hale and understanding exactly how she thought had built an entire plan and left one hole in it. One variable unaccounted for. The janitor on the night shift who knew the building better than anyone with a nameplate on their office door. Cross hadn't been careless. He'd been blind. And there was something in that Ethan thought that mattered. Something about which people you see and which people you don't, and what that cost you in the end. His phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He picked up. Cole. A man's voice. Older, with the particular weight of someone who had spent decades being listened to. "My name is Arthur Vance. I'm the chairman of the Aurora Technologies Board of Directors. I apologize for the hour." Ethan said nothing, waiting. "I've been briefed on tonight's events," Vance continued, "in considerable detail, by Victoria, by Agent Walsh, and by Marcus Reed, who I've known for 11 years, and who is not a man who impresses easily." A pause. He used the word extraordinary, twice. "He's generous," Ethan said. "He's precise," Vance said. "There's a difference." Another pause. "I wanted to call personally, not through a representative, not through legal counsel, personally. To tell you that on behalf of the board of Aurora Technologies, we are grateful. Deeply and specifically grateful, not in the abstract way these things usually get said." He paused again. "And I wanted to tell you that whatever you need medically, legally, professionally, the company will ensure you have it. Without condition." Ethan looked at his wrapped hand. "That's not necessary." "Mr. Cole?" "I didn't do it for the company," Ethan said. It came out quietly, without edge. Just true. "I did it because there were people in that building." A long pause on the other end of the line. "I know," Vance said. "That's precisely why I'm calling." Ethan was discharged at 5:43 in the morning. A car had been arranged, not a company car, but a private sedan, arranged by Priya, who had apparently spent the 3 hours since leaving the hospital herself, coordinating logistics for half a dozen people simultaneously, while also Ethan suspected not sleeping at all. The driver didn't talk. Ethan appreciated that. His sister Maya lived in a brownstone 12 minutes from the hospital, and when he knocked on her door at 6 in the morning, she opened it in 30 seconds flat, which meant she had been awake and waiting. She took one look at him, the wrapped hand, the bandage on his head, the gray maintenance uniform that still smelled faintly of smoke, and said, "Ethan James Cole," in the voice their mother used to use, and pulled him inside. "I'm fine," he said. "You have a bandage on your head. Minor concussion. I am fine. Your hand. Second degree, small area. I'm fine, Maya." She looked at him for a long moment with the specific expression of an older sister who has decided not to say everything she is thinking, which in Maya's case was an expression that required considerable effort. "Lily's asleep," she said. "She called you last night." "I know. I picked up. She had a dream." "I know." Maya looked at him. She dreamed about a fire. The word settled between them. Ethan had told Maya almost nothing about his work over the years at the Phoenix unit, not the accident, not the men he'd lost. She knew the shape of it the way family knows things from the edges and silences, rather than the direct telling. She knew he had left something important behind, and that the leaving had cost him. She had never asked him to explain it. Now she looked at his bandaged hand and the exhaustion behind his eyes, and she said very quietly, "Was it bad?" "It's over," he said. She nodded. That was enough for her, or rather she chose to let it be enough, which was its own kind of grace. She made coffee. He sat at her kitchen table in his smoke-stained uniform and drank it, and neither of them said much, and it was enough. At 7:15, he heard small feet on the stairs. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, the ones with the small yellow stars that she had picked out herself and loved, with a devotion that he found endearing beyond description, and she stopped when she saw him, and her face did that thing. It sometimes did that thing she had inherited from her mother, where all the emotion ran straight to the surface, without any of the adult armor that learns to hold it back. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, and wrapped both arms around his waist, and pressed her face against his chest, and didn't say anything. He held her with his good hand. His bandaged hand he kept carefully away from her, not wanting to alarm her with it, not yet. After a long moment, she pulled back and looked up at him. Her eyes were very serious. She was 10 years old, and she had her mother's eyes exactly the same dark brown, the same quality of attention that felt like being truly looked at rather than merely seen. "You were in the fire," she said. Not a question. "Yeah," he said. "On the news they said." She stopped. "Aunt Maya wouldn't let me watch the news." "Smart woman," Maya said from the coffee maker. "Was anyone hurt?" Lily asked. "Some people needed doctors, nothing serious." He paused. "Everyone got out." Lily looked at him for another long moment with those serious eyes. Then she said, "Because of you." "Because of a lot of people," he said. She considered this. Then, "But you helped." "Yeah," he said. "I helped." She nodded as if this confirmed something she had already known. Then she said, "Does your hand hurt?" and pointed at the bandage that he had not successfully kept her from noticing because Lily noticed everything. "A little," he said. "Is it bad?" "It's going to be fine." She looked at it for one more moment. Then she looked up at him. "I made you something," she said. "Yesterday at school. Before—" She gestured vaguely at the night and everything it contained. "Wait here." She disappeared up the stairs and came back 2 minutes later with a piece of construction paper blue with something drawn on it in marker. She handed it to him. He looked at it. It was the same stick figure she always drew. Gray uniform mop. Dad underneath in her careful handwriting. But this time, she had added something new. A small group of stick figures around the central one. And above them in careful letters, "The most important job." Ethan Cole sat at his sister's kitchen table at 7:17 in the morning, smelling like smoke with a bandaged hand and a mild concussion, and felt something release in his chest that had been held for a very long time. He looked at the drawing for a long time. "Thank you, Bug," he said. "You can put it on the refrigerator at home," she said practically. "Next to the other one." He did. The story broke at 9 a.m. Ethan was asleep on Maya's couch when it happened. the first real sleep he'd had, deep and immediate in the way that only comes after the body has spent everything it has, and he slept through the first wave of it entirely. He didn't see the breaking news alerts. He didn't see the video footage taken from a bystander's phone of a man in a gray maintenance uniform emerging from Aurora Global Center at 10:51 p.m., carrying a young man over his shoulder with two other people close behind. He didn't see the coverage of Daniel Cross being walked out of the parking structure in handcuffs, or Victoria Hale's brief statement to the press at midnight, or the reaction across social media to a single sentence from that statement. The sentence where Victoria Hale said, "Tonight the man who kept every person in this building alive was a member of our night maintenance staff. His name is Ethan Cole. He slept through all of it." He woke at 2 in the afternoon to 37 missed calls. He lay on the couch and looked at his phone for a moment and thought with a clarity that surprised him that whatever came next was going to require the same thing as last night, knowing which problems mattered and which ones were noise and moving toward the ones that mattered. He called Victoria first. She picked up on the second ring. "How are you feeling?" "Fine. How many people have you talked to today?" "Including lawyers, board members, federal agents, 2 U.S. senators, and a journalist from the Times." A pause. "Too many. How's your hand?" "Fine. You said my name publicly." "I did." "That's going to complicate things." "It was already complicated," Victoria said. "The choice was between letting someone else define what happened last night or defining it myself. I chose to define it." A pause. "I also chose to make sure that the person responsible for saving 57 lives was not going to be quietly thanked and shuffled back to the maintenance roster. That was a deliberate choice, Ethan. I won't apologize for it." He lay on the couch looking at Maya's ceiling. "I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking what you need from me." A brief silence. Then, "The FBI needs a formal statement. That can be done privately. I can have counsel present if you want. The board wants to meet with you. I'm managing the timeline on that. It won't be today. And there's a journalist, David Park, New York Times, someone I trust, who wants to talk to you for a story about last night." She paused. "That last one is entirely your choice. I won't push you toward it, and I won't push you away from it." "What's the story he wants to tell?" "The real one," Victoria said. "Not the dramatic version. The real version, which is somehow more dramatic. A man who was invisible in plain sight, who knew more than anyone with a title, who saved 57 people because he understood that buildings are not just systems. They're structures built by human beings for human beings, and if you pay attention long enough, you learn them completely." She paused. "He called it the most important leadership story of the year." I thought that was somewhat reductive, but not entirely wrong. Ethan was quiet. "You don't have to decide anything today," Victoria said. "Sleep. Eat something. Be with your daughter." A pause. "That's an instruction, not a suggestion. Whatever happens next can wait 24 hours. He almost smiled. "You give orders like someone who's used to being listened to." "Occupational hazard," she said. Then more quietly, "Ethan, I meant what I said last night. About the conversation I want to have with you. About what comes next." "I remember. When you're ready." "Give me a week," he said. "You have it." He ended the call and lay there for another minute, listening to the sound of Lily in the kitchen with Maya, some disagreement about what to have for lunch that was being conducted with great energy on Lily's part and great patience on Maya's. Ordinary sounds. Irreplaceable sounds. Then he got up. The FBI interview happened the following morning in a conference room at the Federal Building downtown with Agent Walsh and 2 colleagues and a court reporter and a lawyer that Victoria had provided, and that Ethan used exactly once to clarify a question before setting aside. He told them everything. The sequence of the grid failure, the ventilation panel on 52, the fuel system logic, the conversation in the sublevel. Daniel Cross's exact words. Walsh listened to all of it without interruption, and when he finished, she looked at him with the expression of someone assembling a picture from pieces that had been scattered for a long time. "The transmission Priya recorded," Walsh said. "Don't let Cole. You heard that on the radio." Yes. Mr. Cole, we've been investigating Daniel Cross for 14 months. We knew about the financial crimes. We did not know. She paused, and for a federal agent of considerable experience, the pause was surprisingly unguarded. We did not know that Cross had identified you as a potential threat to the operation. That tells us there's a layer to this we haven't fully mapped yet. What does that mean? The lawyer asked. It means Cross knew something about Mr. Cole's background, Walsh said. Which means he ran a background check. Which means he was watching this building's staff more carefully than a man who was just trying to steal money. She looked at Ethan directly. Mr. Cole, did anyone approach you in the weeks before last night? Any unusual contact? Anyone asking questions about the building or the event? Ethan thought. He was careful about this the way he was careful about most things he didn't answer until he was sure. 3 weeks ago, he said slowly. A man in the parking structure said he was a new building engineer, asked me some questions about the mechanical room access. I thought he was just getting oriented. Walsh was already writing. Description. He gave it. Compact, mid-40s, dark jacket. Didn't give a name. Walsh looked at her colleague. Something passed between them that was not for Ethan's benefit. We're going to need a sketch artist, she said. The sketch artist came at noon. By 1:30, the sketch had been sent to 3 field offices. By 3 p.m., Walsh called the conference room phone and said in a voice that contained the particular tightness of someone managing a significant professional surprise that the man in the parking structure had been identified as a private security contractor with known ties to 2 of the offshore entities in the Cross investigation. The lawyer looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the table. Mr. Cole, Walsh said over the phone. I need you to understand something. Daniel Cross did not just try to destroy evidence last night. He tried to eliminate a specific threat. You. A pause. Which means he had reason to believe that you were more dangerous to his plan than 57 other people in that building. He was right, Ethan said. A beat of silence. Yes, Walsh said. He was. The lawyer drove Ethan home at 4 in the afternoon. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building 6 blocks from Lily's school, a 2-bedroom place with good light and a kitchen that he had repainted twice, and bookshelves that he had built himself from lumber and brackets on a Saturday 2 years ago when Lily decided she needed more room for her books, which was a need he had taken very seriously. He stood in the kitchen for a moment when he got home. The drawings were on the refrigerator, the old one, the stick figure with the mop and dad, and the new one with the group of figures and the most important job. He stood looking at them. Then he sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen and started writing. Not a statement, not a report. Just his own account of the night in his own words, the way he had kept accounts after every significant operation during his Phoenix unit years. Dates, times, decisions, the reasoning behind each one. Not for anyone else, for himself. Because he had learned a long time ago that the way you process something difficult is to look at it clearly. Name every part of it. Understand what you did and why and what you would do differently. He wrote for 2 hours. At the end, he sat back and read what he'd written and found that there was very little he would do differently. The ventilation override first before anything else. The fuel shut off before engaging Cross. The evacuation sequence in zones rather than a single push toward one exit. One thing he would do differently. He wrote it at the bottom of the last page. Tell Marcus Reed about the fuel system before going down alone. He looked at that sentence for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus. Marcus answered immediately. Cole. Reed. Ethan paused. I should have told you about the fuel system before I went into the sublevel alone. Silence on the other end. Then, you were moving fast. I was also not trusting you yet, Ethan said. That wasn't entirely fair. Another silence. No, Marcus said with the directness of a man who respected honesty enough not to deflect it. It wasn't, but I hadn't given you much reason to. No, Ethan said. You hadn't. They sat with that for a moment. My team wants to buy you a drink, Marcus said. When you're cleared medically. Tell them I appreciate it. They're not going to take no for an answer, Cole. Then tell them next week. Done. A pause. The board meeting is scheduled for Friday. Victoria's office called me this morning. She wants both of us in the room. Ethan hadn't known that. Both of us. That's what she said. I thought about what that meant. Victoria Hale wanting both the head of executive security and the night janitor at the same table with the board of directors of a Fortune 100 company, 3 days after a crisis that had exposed fundamental failures in how the company thought about safety and who it trusted with responsibility. She's going to change something, Ethan said. She's going to change several things, Marcus said. I think that's the right call. So do I. Another pause. Marcus Reed said in a tone that was businesslike, and therefore for him as close to personal as he generally got. Cole, last night, you called me by my first name once, on the radio when you needed me to get Ms. Hale moving. Ethan remembered. Yeah. Nobody calls me Marcus on duty, not even my own team. I know. I didn't correct you, Marcus said. I noticed. A beat. Drink, next week. Don't cancel. I won't, Ethan said. He put the phone down and looked at the legal pad. Outside his window, the January afternoon was going gray, the light flattening toward evening, and in 4 hours, he would drive to Maya's and pick up Lily and bring her home for dinner, and she would tell him everything about her day with the particular thoroughness of a child who believes her father is genuinely interested in every detail which he was. He would make pasta because it was her favorite, and his burned hand would make the chopping interesting but manageable, and they would sit at the kitchen table under the good light and eat and talk, and it would be, as it always was, the best part of his day. But first, he turned to a fresh page on the legal pad and sat for a moment. Then he wrote at the top, Cole Initiative Draft. He didn't know yet that Victoria was already thinking the same name. He didn't know that in her office across the city, she was on the phone with Arthur Vance, outlining a proposal that had been forming in her mind since the moment she stood in the snow outside Aurora Global Center and watched a man in a gray uniform answer the question of what leadership actually meant. He just knew that something had to be different. That a building full of people should never again depend on the accidental presence of someone who happened to know what others didn't. Someone who happened to be paying attention when the systems failed. That the knowledge that saved 57 lives last night, the knowledge of pipes and panels and pressure gauges, and the specific integrity of load-bearing structures under heat stress was not accidental. It was the product of attention and experience, and the willingness to learn the unglamorous things, and it belonged in every level of how a building and a company operated. He wrote for another hour. What he produced was not polished. It was blunt and practical and specific in the way that his thinking always was. Here is the problem. Here is the structural reason. The problem exists. Here is a concrete change that addresses the root, not the symptom. Cross-training between maintenance and security. A reporting system that ran parallel to the chain of command so that someone on the floor level could escalate a concern without it being filtered through 3 management layers first. A quarterly audit of every manual override system in the building conducted by maintenance staff, not building management, because maintenance staff were the ones who actually touched these systems every day and would notice if something had been tampered with. At the bottom he wrote cost of implementing this approximately $40,000 annually. Cost of not implementing this everything. He sat back and looked at what he'd written. Then he stood up, went to the refrigerator, looked at the 2 drawings, the old stick figure and the new one, and thought about everything they represented. The old drawing was who he had been trying to be. Small, invisible, safe. The new drawing, the one with the group, with the most important job, was what Lily already understood about him that he was only now catching up to. He put the legal pad in his work bag. The board meeting was Friday. He would be there. The call from David Park at the New York Times came at 6 that evening, while Ethan was in the car picking up Lily. He let it go to voicemail. In the voicemail, Park said his name, his title that he was working on a piece about last night, and that he wasn't looking for the dramatic version of the story, but the real one, the one about systems and structures, and the people who actually hold buildings together, while everyone else is looking at the people with the corner offices. He sounded genuine. Ethan had listened to enough people to know the difference. He would call him back. Not tonight. But he would call. Lily was quiet in the car on the way home, which was unusual enough that Ethan looked at her twice in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window at the city going by in the evening dark, and she had the expression she sometimes got when she was working something out. "What?" he said. "Nothing." "Lily." She turned from the window. "At school today, Emma's mom picked Emma up early because she saw you on the news, the Aurora building thing." She paused. "Mrs. Patterson talked about it in class. She didn't know your name, but she said the janitor saved everyone. And then Malik looked it up on his phone, and he said it was you, and then everyone—" She stopped. "Then everyone what?" "They kept saying your name," she said. "Ethan Cole, like it meant something." She looked at him with those steady brown eyes. "Is that weird?" "Is what weird?" "That it took something happening for people to say your name, like it meant something." He thought about Daniel Cross saying you're the janitor. He thought about Marcus Reed saying I never learned your name. He thought about 4 years of walking through a building full of people who had walked past him like furniture. "Yeah," he said, "it is weird." "I always said your name like it meant something," Lily said, matter-of-factly, and turned back to the window. Ethan drove through the city in the evening dark, and felt something in his chest that was too big and too simple for any word he knew. Pride was part of it. Gratitude. Something that was not quite grief, but was adjacent to it. The particular feeling of realizing that you have been carrying something for a long time that you thought was a burden, and that turns out to have been a compass. He had spent 10 years becoming invisible, and the invisibility had made him exactly what last night required. But Lily had never seen him as invisible. She had always known exactly who her father was. They made pasta. She told him about school, about Malik and Emma and Mrs. Patterson, and a science project involving vinegar and baking soda that had gone more dramatically than planned. He listened to every word with the full attention he had always given her. The same attention he had given to pressure gauges and ventilation panels, and the sound of a burning building telling you what it was about to do next. After dinner, she washed her hands at the kitchen sink and looked at his bandaged palm and said, "Does it hurt now?" "A little," he said. She thought about this. Then, with the grave practicality that he loved about her completely, she said, "I can do the dishes." "Yeah. I know how." "I know you do." "So you should let me," she said. He stepped back from the sink. She stepped up to it serious and capable in her yellow star pajamas and began doing the dishes with the particular focus of someone performing an important task. He stood behind her and watched and thought that she was the most remarkable person he had ever known, and that he had known some remarkable people. At 8:30, she was asleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad and added 3 more items to the Cole Initiative draft, and then he closed the pad and sat in the quiet of his apartment and let the last 48 hours sit with him for a while. All of it. The weight and the relief and the loss and the finding the burning door, and Lily's drawing, and Marcus Reed's handshake, and Victoria Hale saying his name like it was something solid and real. I thought about the 3 men he had lost 10 years ago. He thought about them the way he always did, not with the old suffocating guilt, but with the grief that was their proper due. Good men. Men who had trusted him. He thought, "I carry you. I will always carry you. But I am done letting the carrying stop me." His phone was on the table. He picked it up and called David Park back. Park answered on the second ring. "Mr. Cole," he said, "thank you for calling. You said you wanted the real story," Ethan said. "I do. Not the dramatic version." "The dramatic version is already everywhere," Park said. "What I want is the version that explains how this happened. The structural version, the human version, who you actually are and what you actually know, and why it was you specifically who saw what no one else saw." A pause. "I think that story matters." Ethan looked at the Cole Initiative draft on the table. "So do I," he said. "Can we meet?" "Tomorrow," Ethan said. "I've got somewhere to be Friday." David Park was 41 years old and had been writing for the Times for 14 years, and in that time he had interviewed senators and CEOs and a former Secretary of State, and one man who had survived 11 days alone in the Pacific Ocean after his boat capsized. He had a particular gift for stillness, for the kind of listening that made people feel that their words were landing somewhere solid and being held carefully. And he had learned early in his career that the best interviews happened not when he pushed, but when he simply made enough space for the truth to come forward on its own. He met Ethan at a diner 3 blocks from Ethan's apartment at 9 Thursday morning. The diner was the kind of place that had been there for 30 years, and would be there for 30 more vinyl booths. Coffee that came in a thick ceramic mug without being asked for a laminated menu that hadn't changed since the Clinton administration. Ethan had been coming here since he moved to the neighborhood. The woman behind the counter, a Greek-American grandmother named Stella, who had once told Ethan that she liked him because he always said thank you and never left a mess, brought his coffee before he sat down and looked at Park with the frank assessment of someone deciding whether a newcomer deserved the same courtesy. Park apparently passed because she brought his coffee too. Phoenix Rescue Unit, Park said after they'd been sitting for 10 minutes and Ethan had told him the straightforward version of the night, not sparse but clean the way Ethan told things. I did some research before this morning. The unit's record was extraordinary. Industrial collapse response hostage situations, 2 international deployments. And then it was disbanded. Ethan wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. His right hand, the burned one, was still wrapped, but he could manage the mug. Yeah. The official reason was budget restructuring. That was the official reason. Park looked at him. What was the real reason? Ethan was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, preparing the answer. We lost 3 men on a call in Detroit. A factory fire. I cleared the building for entry, and 1 floor hadn't been fully assessed. We went in. The floor gave. He paused. Marcus Webb, Darnell Price, Joaquin Torres. He said all 3 names the way you say names that you have said to yourself every day for 10 years in the dark before sleep. Darnell was 26. He had a daughter who was 8 months old. Park didn't write anything. He just listened. After the investigation, the unit was reviewed, Ethan said. The finding was that the assessment protocol had been followed correctly, and the failure was structural, not predictable, not preventable, given what we knew. They cleared me. He paused. I cleared myself a lot less easily. You left voluntarily. I did. And became a janitor. Ethan looked at him. I got a job that let me raise my daughter. One where nobody died if I made a mistake. He paused. And one where I could be inside buildings, where I could learn them. I don't know if that was conscious at this time. Looking back, it seems like it was. Park wrote 1 sentence in his notebook. Ethan didn't try to read it. The man on the radio, Park said. In the building during the crisis. 43 years old, former Special Operations Commander, telling trained security professionals where to go and what to touch. What was that like internally? Ethan thought about it. Like muscle memory, he said. I didn't decide to do it. It was the thing that was needed, and I knew how to do it, so I did it. He paused. The strange part wasn't doing it. The strange part was realizing halfway through that I'd stopped thinking of myself as someone who could. When did you realize it? When the ventilation override worked, and I heard the pressure reading change in stairwell C, Ethan said. There was a moment where I thought that worked. And then I thought, why did that surprise you? And there wasn't a good answer. Park nodded slowly. You said something to Walsh during the interview. She told me, with your permission for the interview, that you told her the difference between last night and Detroit was that you knew this building. He paused. I want to ask you to expand on that, because I think there's something in it that's bigger than the immediate story. Ethan set down his coffee mug. You want to know why knowing a building matters. I want to know what it means to know something that the people in charge don't know. What that gap costs. Why it exists. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Outside the diner window. Chicago was doing what Chicago did on a January morning, gray sky. People moving fast with their chins down the city, running at its own pace, regardless of anything that had happened the night before in one of its buildings. Cross spent 9 years in that company, Ethan said. He knew the financial systems, the organizational structure, the security protocols. He knew how Victoria thought and how Marcus would respond to a crisis. He was smart enough to build a plan around all of that. He paused. But he'd never been in the mechanical sublevel at 2 in the morning when a distribution valve was running slow and needed adjustment. He'd never traced a ventilation problem through the ductwork by sound and touch because the diagnostic system was showing a false reading. He'd never noticed that the manual override panel on 52 had been wired on a separate circuit because the building engineer who installed it 30 years ago didn't trust digital systems. He knew the building on paper, Park said. He knew it from the top, Ethan said. There's a version of every building, every company, every system that exists in the reports and the blueprints and the org charts. And there's the version that exists in the actual physical reality of the thing. The gap between those two versions is where most disasters live. Park wrote for 15 seconds straight, and the people who know the real version, Park said, are usually the people that nobody is looking at. Usually, Ethan said. Yeah. Park looked up from his notebook. Is that why Cross included you in his plan? Because he knew you were one of those people. The question landed differently than Park had probably intended it. Because the answer was something Ethan had been sitting with since Walsh had told him about the sketch artist identification, since the moment he understood that Daniel Cross, who had ignored him, categorized him, dismissed him with 3 words. In the sublevel had also simultaneously identified him as the single greatest threat to the entire operation. Cross did background checks on the maintenance staff, Ethan said. He found my Phoenix unit record. He knew what I was capable of. He paused. He just couldn't reconcile that with what he saw when he looked at me. What did he see when he looked at you? A janitor, Ethan said. He saw the uniform and the mop cart and the job title, and he made the same mistake everyone makes. He assumed the category explained the person. He paused. He knew I was dangerous enough to plan around, but he couldn't quite believe it enough to actually stop me. Park set his pen down. That's the story, he said. It wasn't a question. That's part of it, Ethan said. What's the other part? Ethan reached into his work bag and took out the legal pad. He set it on the table between them, open to the pages he had written the Cole Initiative draft, with its blunt specific proposals, and the line at the bottom about cost. Park read it. He read slowly and carefully the way he listened, and when he was done, he looked up at Ethan and said, "You wrote this last night. After I got home from the hospital. It's a structural reform proposal. It's what should have been in place already," Ethan said. If it had been Cross couldn't have touched the building systems without someone on the maintenance side flagging it. The man in the parking structure who questioned me 3 weeks ago, that should have been reported up through a channel that went somewhere real, not lost in a general security log that nobody reads. He paused. 57 people almost died because the people who knew the most about that building had no mechanism for their knowledge to matter. Park looked at the draft for another moment. Then he said, "You're going to present this Friday." To the board, yes. What do you think they'll do with it? Ethan thought about Victoria on the phone the previous morning, about Arthur Vance calling him at midnight, about Marcus Reed saying she's going to change several things, and I think that's the right call. I think they'll listen, he said. I think it's going to depend on whether they can get past the fact that it's coming from a janitor. Park looked at him steadily. And if they can't, then I'll find another way to make it happen, Ethan said simply, without drama. The idea doesn't become less true because of who's saying it. Park picked up his pen. Mr. Cole, last question, and you don't have to answer it. Ethan nodded. The men you lost, Park said carefully. Marcus Webb, Darnell Price, Joaquin Torres. Is any part of what you did Wednesday night, the building, the initiative, any of it for them? Ethan sat with the question. All of it, he said. Every bit of it. He paused. And none of it, because they deserved better than being the reason someone else finally got it right. He looked at his wrapped hand. What I do for them is remember them correctly, not as a reason for guilt, as a reason for attention. He paused. They were good at what they did. They went in because I told them it was right to go in. The least I can do is be worthy of that trust. Not just that night. Every night. Park wrote for a long time. Friday came cold and sharp, the kind of Chicago January day that feels like the city is testing you. Ethan wore a suit. Not the maintenance uniform, a dark charcoal suit that he had bought for Maya's wedding 6 years ago, and that still fit, because he had not changed much in 6 years in the ways that suits measure. He drove downtown, parked in a public garage 4 blocks from Aurora Global Center, because it did not occur to him to use the executive parking access that Priya had arranged, and he walked through the January cold with his work bag over his shoulder and his legal pad inside it, and the coal initiative draft that he had refined 3 more times in the last 48 hours. The board conference room was on the 58th floor. He had cleaned that floor 100 times. He took the elevator up, which felt different than he expected it to, and when the doors opened on 58, Priya was there. She looked exactly like someone who had slept very little in the last 4 days and was running entirely on competence and coffee, which Ethan suspected was her natural state. "They're ready," she said. "Victoria wants 5 minutes with you first." Victoria's office was at the corner of 58, all glass on 2 sides, the city visible in every direction. She was standing when he came in, not seated behind her desk, but standing in front of it, which he registered as deliberate. No desk between them, no hierarchy of furniture. She looked at the suit. "You look different," she said. "Same person," he said. "I know." She paused. "How are you feeling?" "Ready." "Good." She paused again. "Arthur Vance is in that room. 3 other board members, legal counsel, Marcus, 2 members of the executive team who are not Daniel Cross." She said Cross's name without inflection, the way you say the name of something that has been dealt with and does not require further emotional investment. "They've all read the incident report. They've all seen Walsh's preliminary findings. They know what happened." She looked at him. "What they don't know yet is what you're going to propose. Are you going to tell them before I do?" "No," she said. "I'm going to let you tell them yourself." He nodded. "One thing," she said. "Vance is going to ask you about the Phoenix unit, directly. He looked you up." "Okay." "He's not hostile. He's precise. He wants to understand how you make decisions under pressure." She paused. "Answer him honestly." "I always answer honestly," Ethan said. She almost smiled. "I know. I'm telling you because with Vance, honesty sometimes sounds like arrogance to people who don't know you. Don't soften it." "Noted," he said. They went in. The conference room was long with a table that seated 27 people currently at it. And when Ethan walked in, he registered each of them in the practiced way he'd developed over years of walking into rooms that required rapid assessment. Vance at the head, 70 silver, with the relaxed authority of a man who had nothing left to prove, and therefore no need to perform. Marcus to the left in a suit that looked like he slept in suits, which he probably did. 2 board members whose names he'd been given. Reynolds, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on her head, and Kim, a Korean-American man about Vance's age, with a stillness that Ethan recognized as the stillness of someone who listened for a living. Legal counsel, a man named Barrow, who was already looking at his phone and would look at it 3 more times before the meeting ended. And 2 executive team members, one of whom Ethan recognized from the event on Wednesday, a man named Porter, who had been on the 56th floor with Victoria's group, and who had, during the evacuation, followed every instruction calmly and without complaint, and helped 2 catering staff navigate the stairwell without being asked. Ethan had noticed that. He noticed things like that. He sat down. Victoria sat beside him. Vance said without preamble, because Vance was clearly not a man who trafficked in preamble. "Mr. Cole, I've read 3 reports about Wednesday night, Walsh's, Marcus's, and Victoria's. They tell the same story from 3 angles, and the constant in all 3 is you." He paused. "I want to hear it from you." So Ethan told it. He told it the same way he'd told Park, clean and sequential, without dramatizing, without false modesty. He told it from the moment he saw the panel indicators go red to the moment. He handed Daniel Cross off to Marcus's agents in the parking level. He answered questions as they came from Vance and Reynolds and Kim, and he answered them directly and without hedging. And when Vance asked about the Phoenix unit, he talked about it without flinching. The 8 years, the record, Detroit, the 3 men, the decision to leave. Vance listened to all of it. Then he said, "You blamed yourself for Detroit." "Yes," Ethan said. "The investigation cleared you." "Investigations clear people," Ethan said. That's what they're designed to do. They establish whether protocol was followed. Protocol was followed. 3 men still died. He paused. Both things are true. Vance looked at him for a long moment. And yet you went back into a dangerous building on Wednesday. Yes. Why, if you blamed yourself for the last time? Because this time I knew the building, Ethan said. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't working from incomplete information. I had 4 years of direct physical knowledge of every system in that structure, and I knew I was certain that I could get people out. He paused. That's not arrogance. That's the difference between a risk and a gamble. A gamble is when you don't know the odds. A risk is when you do. The room was very quiet. Marcus was looking at the table with the expression of a man reviewing a conversation he'd had with himself recently and finding that it held up. Vance said, "What's in the bag?" Ethan reached into his work bag and took out the legal pad. He set it in the center of the table. "A proposal," he said, "for what this company should do differently." He walked them through it. All of it. The cross-training, the parallel reporting system, the manual override audits, the institutional rationale for each one. He was specific. He was fast. He did not repeat himself. He told them the annual cost, and he told them what the alternative had almost been. Reynolds picked up the legal pad halfway through and read while he talked. Kim asked 2 questions, both precise, both good. Barrow the lawyer stopped looking at his phone. When Ethan finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Vance said, "You wrote this the night you got out of the hospital?" "Yes." "With a 2nd-degree burn on your writing hand?" "The other hand," Ethan said. "I'm left-handed." Something moved across Vance's face, not amusement recognition. "Mr. Cole," Vance said, "I have one question that is not about the proposal." Ethan waited. "In 11 years of board work with this company, I have sat across from a great many people who wanted to tell me what Aurora Technologies should do differently. Most of them had significant financial incentives to be in that conversation." He paused. "You have no financial incentive. You have a burned hand and a concussion and a job that pays approximately 1/40th of what the people at this table make." He paused again. "Why is this the hill you're choosing?" Ethan looked at him. "Because it works," he said. "And because I'm the only person who was in that building on Wednesday night who can prove that it works." He paused. "And because Darnell Price's daughter is 18 years old now. And if one thing I do before I die means that no one has to tell another 18-year-old that her father isn't coming home because the people in charge didn't know what the people on the ground knew, then that's the hill." No one said anything for a very long time. Then Victoria said, "I'd like to call a vote." Vance looked at her. On adopting the Cole Initiative as company policy with an implementation timeline of 90 days and budget allocation to be determined by legal and operations." She paused. "And on offering Ethan the position of Director of Operational Safety and Infrastructure, a role we are creating because it did not exist before Wednesday and should have." Ethan looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was not interested in discussing it further. "That's a significant offer," Reynolds said. "It's an accurate offer," Victoria said. "The role should have existed. The person who should fill it is in this room." She paused. "We have spent a great deal of this company's history optimizing the things we can see and measure. The org chart, the financial systems, the executive team. We have systematically underinvested in the knowledge that exists below the threshold of what we bother to look at." She paused again. "Wednesday night showed us what that costs. This is the correction." Vance looked at Ethan. "Mr. Cole, before we vote, your response to the offer." Ethan sat back. He thought about Lily's drawing. He thought about the 3 names he said to himself every night. He thought about the legal pad in the center of the table and the 2 hours he'd spent writing it the night he got home from the hospital and the quiet certainty he'd felt doing it. He thought about Victoria saying you were exactly who you were supposed to be. He thought about one more thing. "I want to keep the maintenance staff reporting to me," he said. "Not as subordinates, as the core of the operational intelligence. Whatever title I have, if the night maintenance crew can't bring me a concern directly and have it acted on, the whole thing doesn't work. Vance looked at him for a moment. Then, "That's in the proposal you wrote." "I know. I'm saying it out loud." Vance nodded. Vote. The vote was 4-1. The one was Barrow, who abstained on the grounds that the implementation details needed further legal review, which Victoria acknowledged, and which everyone understood meant yes with paperwork. Marcus caught Ethan's eye across the table and did something that on Marcus Reed's face constituted a significant emotional display. He raised his coffee cup slightly in a minimal salute. Ethan nodded back. Afterward, in the hallway outside the conference room, Porter, the executive team member who had helped the catering staff down the stairwell on Wednesday, stopped Ethan and put out his hand. "I never thanked you," Porter said. He was in his 50s, a solidly built man with the kind of face that had spent a lot of time outdoors at some earlier point in his life. "Wednesday night, stairwell C43, you were the voice on the PA system." "I was," Ethan said. "You told us to watch the step at the landing, that it was uneven." Porter paused. "I've been in this building for 6 years. I never knew that step was uneven." "Third landing from the bottom," Ethan said. "Been like that since I've been here. Put in a maintenance ticket 18 months ago." Porter shook his hand. "I'm glad you knew." Ethan took the elevator down alone. He stood in it as it descended the same elevator banks that had been locked on Wednesday night, the shafts that had been filling with smoke, the infrastructure that had been weaponized, and that now ran normally and quietly around him. And he thought about what had just happened in the conference room and tried to find the right scale for it. Director of Operational Safety and Infrastructure. A title that had not existed 48 hours ago. A role that no one had thought to create, because no one had thought to ask what the people who actually touched the building knew about it. He was going to need to tell Lily. She was going to think this was extremely normal and expected. He almost smiled at that. The elevator doors opened on the lobby. He walked through it, the marble floor that he had mopped 1,000 times, the security desk where the guard on duty was a man named Pete, who had always said good morning, the revolving doors that let him out into the January cold. He stopped on the sidewalk. His phone was buzzing. He looked at the screen. David Park Times. He picked up. "Park. The piece is running Sunday," Park said. "I wanted you to know before it was published." A pause. "The headline is, 'The Man Who Knew the Building.' I hope that's all right." Ethan thought about it. "It's accurate," he said. "The editors wanted something more dramatic. I told them accurate was better." Park paused. "There's one more thing. Walsh contacted me this morning. Off the record, but she said I could tell you." Another pause. "The contractor who approached you in the parking garage 3 weeks ago, they found him. He's cooperating with the federal investigation." A beat. "He told them that Cross's original plan did not include the building evacuation failing. The original plan was a targeted fire in the technical floors that would destroy specific servers containing the forensic accounting data. Simple. Clean. Everything else escalated because someone noticed the ventilation sequence," Ethan said. "Because you noticed the ventilation sequence," Park said. "When you called it in on the radio, one of Cross's people heard it on the channel. They knew the original plan was compromised, so Cross escalated to the full building lockdown." A pause. "Which means all of it, the locked stairwells, the elevator situation, the sub-level device, none of that was the original plan. It was improvised in response to you." Ethan stood on the sidewalk in the January cold and let that settle. Daniel Cross had built a precise, elegant plan. And the moment a janitor had said something on a radio, the whole thing had broken, and Cross had panicked and escalated, and in the escalation had created exactly the conditions that made him catchable and prosecutable and finished. "Cole," Park said. "I'm here. Are you all right?" Ethan thought about a man in a parking structure asking him questions about mechanical room access. He thought about being visible enough to be identified as a threat and invisible enough to be underestimated simultaneously. He thought about how both of those things had been true at once, and how the gap between them was exactly the space through which everything had moved. "Yeah," he said. "I'm all right." He ended the call and stood on the sidewalk for another moment, looking up at Aurora Global Center, all 60 floors of it, standing exactly where it had always stood, the January sky behind it. From here you couldn't see which floors had burned. You couldn't see the ventilation systems, or the pressure panels, or the fuel lines, or the manual override behind the HVAC door on 52. You couldn't see any of the things that mattered most. You just saw the building. He turned and walked back to his car. He had a daughter to pick up from school. And on Monday morning, for the first time in 4 years, he was going to walk into Aurora Global Center as something other than the night janitor. He was going to walk in as the man who knew what the building actually was. He was going to walk in as himself. The January wind came off the lake the way it always did, cold and flat and indifferent, moving through the city without caring what had happened in it the week before. Ethan Cole walked into it with his hands in his pockets and his work bag over his shoulder, and the particular stride of a man who knows exactly where he is going. The city moved around him the way cities do, thousands of people, thousands of directions, none of them knowing his name, most of them never going to know it. That was all right. He knew his own name. He had always known it. The Sunday Times piece ran at 6 in the morning. By 7, Ethan's phone had 42 missed calls. By 8, it had stopped being a phone and started being a problem. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when Maya called, and the way she said his name, not alarmed, but carrying something large, told him, before she said anything else, that the article had landed differently than he'd expected. He had expected a news story. He had expected some attention, a few days of noise, and then the normal world reasserting itself the way it always did. What David Park had written was not a news story. It was something closer to a reckoning. Park had titled it, "The Man Who Knew the Building." And in 4,000 words, he had done something that Ethan, reading it on his phone at the kitchen table while his coffee went cold, recognized as genuinely rare. He had written the true version. Not the dramatic version, not the inspirational version, not the version that turned a complicated human being into a symbol for easy consumption. The true version, which was more uncomfortable and more honest and more useful than any of the other versions would have been. Park had written about Phoenix, about Detroit, about Marcus Webb and Darnell Price and Joaquin Torres, whose names appeared in the article with the weight they deserved. He had written about 11 years of night shifts and a daughter raised alone, and a man who had carried something enormous for a long time, and had learned in the carrying to see things that people who carried nothing missed entirely. He had written about Daniel Cross, and about $400 million, and about a building almost destroyed from within, and then he had written about the Cole Initiative, reprinting the core proposals with Ethan's own language, including the line about cost. And he had ended with a question that was not really a question. The question was, how many buildings are being held together right now by someone nobody is looking at? Looking at Maya had been reading it out loud over the phone to their mother in Cincinnati when she called him, which was how Ethan learned that their mother had been crying, which was information that required him to sit down. His mother did not cry easily. "She said to tell you she's proud," Maya said. Ethan looked at the ceiling. "Tell her I'll call her tonight," he said. He got Lily to school by 8:15. She had read the article. He had shown her a version of it the night before, after she was done with her homework, sitting beside him on the couch, with her feet tucked under her, and her reading pace visibly faster than his. And she had read the whole thing without saying anything, and then handed the phone back and said with the particular gravity of a 10-year-old processing something large, "Mr. Park wrote about the step." "What?" Ethan said. "On the stairwell, the uneven step. He wrote about it." She paused. "The part where Mr. Porter said he'd been in the building 6 years and didn't know the step was uneven." She looked at Ethan. "That's the important part." "Why is that the important part?" She looked at him like he'd asked why water was wet. "Because it means you were paying attention when no one else was," she said. "And that's what mattered. Not being brave, paying attention." Ethan looked at his daughter for a long moment. "You're 10 years old," he said. "Almost 11, she said. He dropped her at school and sat in the car outside for 30 seconds, and then drove to Aurora Global Center. The building looked exactly like it always had from the outside. He noticed, because he always noticed things like this, that the ventilation grills on the north face had been serviced since Wednesday. New covers, the screws aligned. Someone had done it right. He noticed the security camera above the main entrance had been repositioned 2 degrees to cover the blind spot it had always had in the lower left corner. Small things. Things that told him the building was already changing before he had officially started, before the 90-day implementation timeline had even begun. Someone was paying attention. He went in. Pete at the security desk said, "Morning, Mr. Cole," and then caught himself and said, "Sir." And Ethan said, "Pete, call me Ethan. Nothing changed." And Pete nodded with the relief of someone who had been genuinely worried about getting that part wrong. Priya met him at the elevator. She had a schedule of visitor badge for a face he didn't recognize yet, and the expression of someone who had been managing other people's logistics for long enough that she could do it in her sleep, and sometimes did. "You have 6 media requests pending," she said. "Victoria is holding all of them until you decide which, if any, you want to take." The FBI sent over the preliminary indictment summary for Cross Walsh. "Wants your eyes on the section about the sub-level device, because there's a technical description she wants you to verify. And your new office is ready on 49. 49, Ethan said. "You requested proximity to the mechanical floors," Priya said. Victoria made it happen. He had not actually made that request formally. He had mentioned it once in passing in the conversation outside the hospital. Victoria Hale had apparently filed it as an instruction. He was going to have to get used to that. "One more thing," Priya said, and something in her voice changed slightly. Not the professional tone, but something underneath it. "There are people waiting in the 4th floor conference room. Not press, not board. They asked to see you personally." She paused. "They said it couldn't wait." He looked at her. "Who?" "Families," she said quietly. "Of some of the people who were in the building Wednesday night." Ethan stood very still. "How many?" he said. 11 people, she said. "They've been here since 7:30. He took the stairs to the 4th floor. The conference room was the same one where AV crews used to do equipment checks before events, a working room, nothing fancy, no view. When he opened the door, 11 people looked up at him. Men and women ranging from maybe 30 to well past 60. Some of them he could match immediately to the names he knew. The young man Reyes had carried down the stairwell was there, with a woman who had his eyes, and was almost certainly his mother. Donna, the catering supervisor who had held that young man's hand on the stairs, was there with a man who had her posture, and was probably her husband. 2 of the event staff from the 47th floor. A woman he didn't recognize at first, until she said, "I'm Angela Webb," and he understood. He understood immediately. Marcus Webb's wife. Or widow. She would have been a widow for 10 years. She was somewhere in her late 40s, dark-haired, with the composed bearing of a woman who had learned to carry grief without letting it show, and had been doing it long enough that the composure was real now, rather than performed. Ethan walked into the room, and the door closed behind him, and nobody said anything for a moment. Then the young man whose name was Carlos Ethan would learn stood up and said, "I wanted to say thank you in person." And his voice broke on the last word completely, and without warning, the way voices do when they've been holding something back for several days, and the holding finally gives. His mother put her hand on his arm. Ethan crossed to where Carlos was standing and put his good hand on the young man's shoulder and said, "Sit down. You don't have to stand." Carlos sat down. His mother looked at Ethan with an expression that Ethan had no armor against pure, unmediated gratitude, the kind that comes not from courtesy, but from the specific knowledge of what the alternative would have looked like. Ethan sat down too, pulling a chair from the wall, rather than standing at the head of the table, and he looked at all 11 of them and said, "I'm glad you're here." They talked for 40 minutes. Carlos told him about the supply room on 47, how they'd heard the alarms, and then the silence, and how the smoke had started coming under the door, and how someone had started to panic, and he'd been trying to keep everyone calm, with no real idea how, because he was 24 years old and had been working events for 8 months. He said that when the voice came through the speaker in the hallway, calm and specific, and absolutely certain about that uneven step on the landing, it had changed something in the room. Not just the practical information, the quality of the voice. It sounded like someone who knew, Carlos said. You can tell the difference between someone guessing and someone who knows. And you just knew. Donna talked about the stairwell, and about the young man whose hand she'd held, and about the moment the door opened, and Marcus Reed was on the other side of it. She said that what she remembered most was not being scared, which surprised her because she had expected in the days since to look back and find the fear she hadn't felt in the moment. But what she remembered was following the voice on the radio, and feeling with a certainty she couldn't entirely explain that whoever was on the other end of it was not going to get it wrong. And then Angela Webb. She had waited. She had sat quietly through the other conversations with her hands folded in her lap and her composure intact. And when the room got quiet, she looked at Ethan and said, "I read the article this morning, about Marcus, about Darnell and Joaquin." She paused. "I never stopped thinking about that night. The investigation, the clearance, all of it." She paused again. "I did not come here to reopen anything painful." "You can say whatever you need to say," Ethan said. "I know," she said. "What I need to say is this." She looked at him steadily. "Marcus talked about you. Not by name, he didn't know your name yet. But he talked about the work, about what it meant to lead a team into a dangerous place and be responsible for bringing them out." She paused. "He said the hardest part wasn't the danger. The hardest part was the weight of being the person they trusted." Ethan said nothing. "Wednesday night," Angela said, 57 people trusted you with that weight, and you carried it." She paused one more time, and when she spoke again, her voice was absolutely level and completely real. "Marcus would have respected that. I wanted you to know that from someone who knew him." The room was very quiet. Ethan looked at his hands, the burned one wrapped and the other one steady on the table, and thought about a man he had never gotten to know well enough, and about 10 years of carrying him, and about what it meant to have someone who loved that man. Tell him that the carrying had been worthy. "Thank you," he said. It was inadequate. He knew it was inadequate. He said it anyway because it was true. Angela Webb nodded once. Then she stood, and everyone else stood, and they filed out with handshakes and brief words and one long hug from Carlos's mother that Ethan did not pull away from. When the room was empty, he sat there for another minute. Then he stood up, picked up his work bag, and went to the 49th floor. His office was small and faced the mechanical floors as requested. Someone he suspected Priya had put a plant in the corner that he would probably kill within a month, and a whiteboard on one wall, and a coffee maker on the credenza that was significantly better than the one in the maintenance break room. His maintenance uniform from Wednesday, cleaned, pressed, folded, was on the chair behind the desk. He looked at the uniform for a long moment. Then he picked it up and hung it on the hook behind the door. He was not done with it. He would never be done with it. But it belonged on the wall now, not in the locker. A reminder of what the work actually looked like. A reminder of which floors you had to be willing to occupy to know a building truly. He sat down at the desk. The Walsh document was waiting, the FBI indictment summary, flagged with 3 sections that needed his technical review. He opened it and started reading, and within 4 minutes he had found 2 errors in the technical description of the sublevel fuel system. The kind of errors that came from someone writing from a diagram rather than direct knowledge of the space. He made notes in the margins, precise and specific, and set it aside to send back to Walsh. His door opened without a knock. Marcus Reed. He was not in a suit. He was in the operational clothes he wore when he was running security assessments, rather than executive protection. Dark pants, a jacket that had more pockets than was strictly necessary for office work. He looked, Ethan thought, like himself, more himself than the suited version. He sat down across from the desk without being invited, which was either presumptuous or comfortable, depending on how you interpreted it, and Ethan chose to interpret it as comfortable. "I read the article," Marcus said. "Everyone read the article," Ethan said. "Park got it right," Marcus said, "which is unusual. Usually when reporters write about security operations, they get something fundamentally wrong about how decisions actually get made." He paused. "He got it right. He listens well," Ethan said. "You gave him something worth listening to." Marcus looked at the uniform on the hook, then back at Ethan. "Angela Webb was here." "She was. I know her. From after." He paused. "She's a remarkable woman." "Yes." Ethan said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, I owe you something I haven't said properly yet. Ethan looked at him. In the sub-level, Marcus said. When you went down alone, I should have been with you. He said it plainly without drama, the way Marcus Reed said everything. Not because you needed backup, you clearly didn't, but because I should have been the kind of operational partner who you trusted to be there. He paused. I wasn't. Not yet. And that was on me. We got there, Ethan said. In a parking lot, Marcus said. After the crisis was over. He shook his head slightly. Not good enough. I run executive protection. My job is to see threats before they materialize, not to figure out who to trust after the building is already on fire. He looked at Ethan directly. I want to do this right going forward. The integration between your office and mine. I don't want another Wednesday where we're recalibrating in real time. Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up a blank sheet of paper from the desk and a pen and wrote 2 columns. He slid the paper across to Marcus. Marcus looked at it. One column was headed, What Security Sees. The other was headed, What Maintenance Sees. That's the gap, Ethan said. That's where Cross lived, in the space between those 2 columns. He paused. We close the gap, we close the vulnerability. Marcus studied the paper. How do we close it? Weekly joint briefing, Ethan said. My team flags anomalies from the physical systems, anything that's been tampered with, modified or behaving differently than it should. Your team flags external threat intelligence. We cross-reference. He paused. It takes an hour a week. It would have caught the contractor in the parking structure inside 48 hours. Marcus picked up the paper. I'll clear Monday mornings. So will I, Ethan said. Marcus stood up. Then at the door he stopped. Cole, he said. Ethan looked up. My team has been calling you something, Marcus said. Since Wednesday night. He paused. I thought you should know. What are they calling me? Marcus almost smiled. The voice, he said. The voice on the radio. The voice in the stairwell. He paused. The voice that knew. He left. Ethan sat with that for a moment. Then he pulled the Cole Initiative draft from his work bag and opened it to the implementation timeline section, because there was work to do, and he had always been better at doing the work than sitting with what the work meant. He was halfway through a revision of the cross-training schedule when his phone buzzed. A number he recognized, now Vance's direct line. He picked up. Mr. Vance. Arthur, Vance said with the mild firmness of a man who had decided something. You've been calling me Mr. Vance since Friday, and it is making me feel old. A pause. I read Park's piece. So I've heard. I've had 7 calls this morning, Vance said. 3 from other companies, 2 in real estate, 1 in manufacturing asking about the initiative. 1 from a university asking if you'd consider a guest lecture series. 1 from a former senator who chairs something with a long name that is essentially a federal building safety committee. And 2 from journalists who are not David Park. Ethan set down his pen. I'm telling you this not to overwhelm you, Vance said, but because I want you to understand something that I don't think you've fully reckoned with yet. He paused. What you did on Wednesday night, and what Park wrote about on Sunday, and what you proposed to the board on Friday, those 3 things together have touched something. A nerve. Something that a great many people apparently needed to say out loud, and didn't have the language for, until you gave them language for it. Another pause. The question of who actually holds things together, who we trust with what, who we see and who we don't. Ethan looked out his window at the mechanical floors. I'm a janitor who wrote a 4-page proposal on a legal pad, he said. You're a man who saw clearly when everyone else was blind, Vance said. And you put it into words simple enough that other people could see it too. A brief pause. That is not a small thing, Ethan. In fact, in my experience, it is the rarest thing. Ethan was quiet. The senator, Vance said. Her committee is looking at building safety regulations at the federal level. She wants to talk to you about whether the Cole Initiative framework could be adapted for a broader policy context. A pause. I told her I'd pass the message. What you do with it is entirely your decision. I'll think about it, Ethan said. That's all I asked, Vance said. One more thing. He paused. How's the hand? Better, Ethan said. Good. And Vance hung up, which was, Ethan was learning how Vance ended all calls, not abruptly, but completely. No trailing pleasantries, just the clean end of a conversation that had said what it needed to say. He put his phone face down on the desk and sat very still. The federal senator. Other companies. A university. 7 calls in one morning from people who had read a newspaper article about an uneven step on a stairwell landing and understood that it meant something larger than itself. He had spent 10 years trying to make himself small. He had spent one night being exactly as large as he was. And now the world was telling him in the particular insistent way the world had of telling you things you weren't ready to hear, that the size he was had been needed all along. He picked up his pen and went back to the implementation timeline. 3 weeks later, the cross-training program held its first session. Ethan ran it himself in the maintenance floor of Aurora Global Center, with 12 people in the room, 6 from the security team, 6 from the night maintenance crew. He had written the curriculum over 2 evenings at his kitchen table, while Lily did her homework across from him, occasionally looking up to ask what he was writing, and he had explained it to her in plain terms, and she had said, "So you're teaching the guards to see what you see?" And he had said yes, and she had nodded as if this were an obvious and necessary thing that should have happened already. He stood in front of the room at 8 in the morning and looked at 12 people who were watching him with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness and openness. And he thought about the first time he had stood in front of a Phoenix unit team, 28 years old, and trying not to show how young he felt. He felt less young now. He felt for the first time in a very long time exactly his age. "I'm going to tell you something at the start of this," he said, "and I want you to hold on to it for the rest of the session. You are not here because your jobs overlap. You are here because the gap between your jobs is where things go wrong." He paused. Security sees threats from the outside. Maintenance sees the building from the inside. Neither of those pictures is complete without the other. What we're doing today is starting to make one picture. He watched the room. A security agent named Fowler, one of Marcus's people, was leaning slightly forward, the physical posture of someone who was genuinely interested, rather than performatively attentive. A maintenance tech named Rosa, who had been working the building for 6 years, and who Ethan knew was the single most knowledgeable person about the 40 through 50 floor mechanical systems, was watching him with the expression of someone waiting to see if the person at the front of the room was actually going to say something useful. He looked at Rosa. "You're going to teach the first half," he said. She blinked. "Me." "You've been maintaining the mechanical systems on floors 40 through 50 for 6 years. You know things about those floors that aren't in any manual." He paused. "The security team is going to need to know those things. You're the right person to tell them." Rosa looked at Fowler. Fowler looked at Rosa. Then Rosa said, "Okay," with the slight upward lift of someone surprised into agreement who is already thinking about where to start. Ethan sat down and let her talk. She talked for 38 minutes. She talked about load-bearing capacity and ventilation zones and the 2 manual overrides that the building's digital diagnostic system didn't register because they were part of the original 1987 infrastructure. She talked about the elevator shaft pressure dynamics that had nothing to do with the elevator company's maintenance contract and everything to do with how the building handled thermal differentials in winter. She talked about the secondary fuel intake valve and exactly where it was physically located and how you could tell by sound alone whether it was running correctly. Fowler was taking notes. 2 other security agents were taking notes. Marcus, who had come in 15 minutes into Rosa's presentation and taken a seat against the wall, was taking notes. When Rosa finished, there was a silence, and then Fowler said, "How long have you known all of this?" Rosa considered. 6 years, she said. "Most of it. Some of it I figured out in the first year." "Did anyone ever ask you about it before?" Rosa looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back at her. "No," she said. Fowler wrote something in his notebook and underlined it. After the session, Marcus came to Ethan in the hallway. "Fowler told me halfway through that this was the most useful professional development he'd done in 3 years of working here. Marcus said. He said that with complete sincerity. He looked mildly annoyed about it, which means it's true. Rosa is going to be an essential part of the joint briefings, Ethan said. I know, Marcus said. I figured that out about 20 minutes into her presentation. He paused. Who else on your team has this kind of operational knowledge? All of them, Ethan said. To varying degrees. That's what I've been trying to explain. It's not about me. It was never about me. It's about the fact that there are 12 people on the night maintenance rotation in this building who know things collectively that no single blueprint contains. The reason none of that knowledge was being used is that nobody asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's the initiative, he said. That's what it actually is. Not a policy, not a reporting system. It's just asking. Yes, Ethan said. That's what it is. Marcus looked at the ceiling briefly, the expression of a man absorbing something simple that he should have seen sooner, and that is more uncomfortable for its simplicity. Then he looked at Ethan and said, The senator's office called my line this morning too. Vance told me. What are you going to do? Ethan thought about the legal pad, about cost of implementing versus cost of not, about Darnell Price's daughter being 18, about Rosa talking for 38 minutes to a room of security professionals who had never thought to ask her anything. I'm going to talk to her, he said. If the framework works here, it works everywhere. Any building, any company, any institution that has people at the bottom who know things that the people at the top don't. He paused. Which is every institution that has ever existed. Marcus nodded slowly. Ethan's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Lily School. He frowned. She never called from school. He picked up. Lily, are you okay? Her voice was not frightened. It was, if anything, barely containing something that was the opposite of frightened. Dad, Mrs. Patterson's class did a current events discussion today. Okay. And she asked everyone to bring in a news story that mattered to them. A pause that was extremely Lily. The pause of someone who had a punchline she was physically restraining herself from delivering too early. I brought in the Times article. Ethan leaned against the hallway wall. Yeah, and Mrs. Patterson read part of it out loud, and she talked about it for the whole class period, and then she said, Lily paused. She said, Does anyone here know this man? And I said yes. Another pause. And she said, How do you know him? And I said, He's my dad. Her voice was completely steady and absolutely incandescent, with something that Ethan recognized with a force that hit him directly in the center of his chest as pride. And everyone looked at me. Yeah, he said again, because it was all he could manage. And I said, He's always been like that. You just have to pay attention. The hallway of Aurora Global Center was quiet. Marcus Reed was standing 6 feet away, apparently reading something on his phone, which meant he had turned away to give Ethan privacy, which was, Ethan thought, one of the more human things he had seen Marcus do. Lily, Ethan said. Yeah, I'm going to be there to pick you up today. 3:15. I'm going to be early. Okay, she said. Dad. Yeah. I'm really proud of you. He pressed his eyes closed for 1 second. I'm really proud of you too, Bug, he said. He ended the call and stood in the hallway for a moment. Marcus turned back around, neither acknowledging nor not acknowledging whatever had just happened, and said, Monday briefing, 8 a.m. I'll have Fowler's notes from today. I'll have Rose's, Ethan said. Marcus nodded and walked away. Ethan straightened, picked up his bag, and went back to his office on the 49th floor. He sat down at his desk and looked at the maintenance uniform on the hook behind the door. At the whiteboard with the 2-column diagram, what security sees, what maintenance sees, that he and Marcus had begun to fill in together. At the plant in the corner that was against all expectations, still alive, I thought about all the versions of himself that had arrived at this desk. The 28 who had led Phoenix for the first time. The man standing in a Detroit warehouse who had said the building was clear. The man who had walked away and chosen small because small felt like penance. The night janitor on the 51st floor who had seen every indicator go red and had known immediately that the silence was not safe. He thought about Lily saying you just have to pay attention, He picked up his pen. He had a cross-training curriculum to finish a joint briefing protocol, to draft a federal senator's office, to call back, and 2 technical corrections to get to Walsh before end of day. He had a daughter to pick up at 3:15 and pasta to make for dinner and a drawing on his refrigerator that said, "The most important job." He had a building to know. He had always had a building to know. Ethan Cole put pen to paper and got to work, and the 49th floor of Aurora Global Center held him the way. All buildings held the people who truly understood them completely without ceremony, and with the quiet permanence of something that had been waiting a